The schoolhouse was burning. Through the smoke and chaos, Elena Harper made a choice that would change 3 lives forever. She ran back inside. Not for books, not for belongings, for a 4-year-old girl who couldn't hear the screams, couldn't hear the crackling flames consuming everything around her. In that moment, the shy teacher who barely spoke found a voice louder than any words could ever be. But this story doesn't begin with fire. It begins months earlier, in silence. The kind that heals, the kind that hurts, and the kind that would ultimately bind a broken family together. Stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The train's whistle cut through the prairie wind like a lonely cry, announcing Elena Harper's arrival to a town that hadn't asked for her. She stepped onto the wooden platform of Red Willow Creek with a single worn suitcase in one hand and a leather satchel in the other, her dark hair pulled back so tightly it made her pale face seem even smaller, more fragile. September sunshine warmed the dusty boards beneath her feet, but Elena felt cold in a way that had nothing to do with weather. She was 23 years old and had already learned that the world preferred voices that commanded rooms, personalities that sparkled and shone. Elena Harper did neither. Her voice, when she used it at all, came out barely above a whisper. A legacy of a childhood spent being told that what she had to say didn't matter. So she had learned other ways to speak, though she doubted anyone in this remote Montana town would understand them. "Miss Harper?" A weathered man in a sheriff's badge approached, his mustache twitching with what might have been amusement or concern. "I'm Sheriff Dawson. The school board sent word you'd be arriving today. I'll take you to the boarding house." Elena nodded, her lips forming a small, polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. She'd perfected that smile over years of being the quiet one, the forgettable one. The town of Red Willow Creek stretched out before her like something from a faded photograph, a main street of dirt and hope, lined with false-fronted buildings that pretended to be grander than they were. A general store, a saloon, a church with a steeple that leaned slightly to the left. And beyond it all, the endless prairie rolled away in waves of golden grass, beautiful and terrifying in its vastness. "Not much to look at, I suppose," Sheriff Dawson said, loading her suitcase onto a small wagon. "But folks here are decent, work hard. The children need a good teacher. Last one left to get married moved to Helena." "It's lovely," Elena said, so quietly that the sheriff had to lean in to hear her. "You'll have to speak up in the classroom, Miss Harper. These prairie children, they're not timid." If only you knew, Elena thought, that speaking up had never been her strength. But her hands could speak volumes, could paint pictures in the air, could reach across the silence that separated people. If only anyone here knew how to listen. The boarding house was run by Mrs. Pritchard, a woman whose warm smile made up for her tendency to talk enough for 3 people. She showed Elena to a small room on the 2nd floor with a window that overlooked the main street and a bed that creaked when Elena sat on it. "You'll take your meals downstairs with the other boarders," Mrs. Pritchard explained, fluffing pillows that didn't need fluffing. "Breakfast at 6, supper at 6. The schoolhouse is just a 10-minute walk down Miller Road. You'll see it. 1 room, painted white, bell on top. Can't miss it. Classes start tomorrow morning. The children will be eager to meet you, I'm sure." After Mrs. Pritchard finally left, Elena unpacked her few belongings with careful precision. 2 simple dresses, her nightgown, a hairbrush, and 3 books, one on mathematics, one on American history, and one that she kept wrapped in cloth at the bottom of her suitcase. This last book had no title on its cover. Inside were careful illustrations of hands forming shapes, accompanied by detailed descriptions. It was a manual on sign language, purchased years ago from a traveling teacher in Boston. Elena had learned to sign when she was 16, after meeting a deaf girl in the orphanage where she'd grown up. The girl's name was Margaret, and she'd been the first person who ever made Elena feel like silence could be a gift rather than a burden. Together, they'd created a world where hands spoke and eyes listened, where communication didn't require the voice that Elena had always struggled to find. Margaret had been adopted by a wealthy family from New York and moved away, but she'd left Elena with something precious, a way to be heard without making a sound. That evening, Elena walked to the schoolhouse alone, wanting to see her new domain before the children arrived. The building stood at the edge of town, surrounded by prairie grass that whispered in the evening breeze. It was indeed painted white, though the paint was peeling in places, and the bell tower rose against the darkening sky like a prayer. Inside, the single room smelled of chalk and old wood. Rows of desks faced a blackboard at the front. A pot-bellied stove sat in the corner, its pipe extending up through the ceiling. Books lined a shelf along one wall, not many, but enough. Elena ran her fingers along the worn spines, reading titles in the fading light. This would be her world now, these four walls, these children she hadn't met yet, this town that would probably never truly see her. Elena had learned not to expect more. She'd learned that people like her, quiet, orphaned, unusual, were meant to exist in the margins, to teach and serve, and eventually be replaced by someone more memorable. But as she stood in that empty schoolroom, watching dust motes dance in the last slanting rays of sunlight, Elena made herself a quiet promise. She might not matter much to this town, but she would matter to these children. Every single one of them would feel seen in her classroom. Every single one of them would know that their teacher, however quiet, cared deeply about who they were. She didn't know yet that one child in particular would change everything. The next morning arrived too quickly and too slowly at the same time. Elena woke before dawn, her stomach tight with nerves. She dressed in her best dress, a simple gray cotton that made her look like a mourning dove, and braided her hair into a crown around her head. In the mirror, she looked exactly like what she was. Young, uncertain, trying desperately to appear competent. The walk to the schoolhouse was beautiful in the early morning light. The prairie stretched out in every direction, painted gold and amber by the rising sun. A meadowlark sang from a fence post, its melody pure and sweet. Elena paused to listen, wishing for a moment that she could be like that bird, able to fill the air with song without fear or hesitation. But she wasn't a meadowlark. She was Elena Harper, and her voice would always be a whisper. The children began arriving at 8 o'clock. They came in groups and pairs, some walking from farms miles away, others spilling out of homes right in town. Elena stood at the door, greeting each one with that careful smile, learning names she knew she'd struggle to remember in her nervousness. "Good morning, I'm Miss Harper. What's your name?" "Tommy Fletcher, ma'am." "Good morning, I'm Miss Harper. What's your name?" "Sarah and Samuel Yates, ma'am. We're twins." "Good morning, I'm Miss Harper. What's your—" She stopped mid-sentence because a man was walking toward the schoolhouse, and even from a distance, Elena could see that he was different from the farmers and shopkeepers who'd brought the other children. He moved with the kind of confidence that came from wealth and power, his clothes too fine for a Tuesday morning, his boots expensive leather rather than worn work boots. And he was carrying a child. The girl in his arms looked about 4 years old, with golden curls that caught the sunlight and a white dress that probably cost more than Elena's entire wardrobe. But it wasn't the child's obvious privilege that made Elena's breath catch. It was the way the girl held herself, rigid and removed, her blue eyes staring at nothing in particular, her small hands clutched tight against her chest. Elena recognized that posture. She'd seen it in Margaret, years ago. The man climbed the steps to the schoolhouse, and up close, Elena could see the exhaustion etched into his handsome features. He was perhaps 30, with dark hair and eyes the color of storm clouds. Those eyes held a kind of desperate hope that made Elena's heart ache. "Miss Harper?" His voice was deep, educated, touched with something Elena couldn't quite name. "I'm Jacob Bennett. This is my daughter Lily." Elena nodded, but her attention was entirely on the child. Lily's eyes never moved toward her father's voice. They didn't even flicker. "I wasn't sure about bringing her," Jacob continued, shifting his daughter's weight in his arms. "The previous teacher said it would be too difficult, that Lily couldn't learn with the other children. But I thought—" He paused, and Elena saw his jaw tighten. "I thought perhaps you might at least try. She's a bright child." She was speaking in full sentences before she got sick. "Scarlet fever," the doctor said. "It took her hearing but left everything else intact. I just need someone to see that. To see her." Elena felt something crack open inside her chest. This powerful man, who probably owned half the county, was standing before her with pleading eyes, asking her to see his daughter, to really see her. Without speaking, Elena stepped forward. She didn't reach for the child. That would have been too much, too fast. Instead, she simply positioned herself directly in Lily's line of sight, and then, very slowly, very deliberately, She raised her hands. Her fingers moved through the air, forming shapes that had meaning, that had power. She signed the word hello, followed by the letters of her name, Elena. For a moment, nothing happened. Lily stared at her with those distant blue eyes, and Elena felt her heart sink. Perhaps the child was too young to understand, too far removed from the world to reach. But then, oh then, Lily's small hands unclenched from her chest. Her eyes, which had been looking at nothing, suddenly focused with laser intensity on Elena's fingers, and her mouth, which had been pressed into a tight line, parted slightly in wonder. Elena signed again, more slowly this time. "Hello, Lily." The child's hands lifted, trembling. Her fingers tried to form shapes, clumsy and uncertain. It wasn't quite right, wasn't quite accurate, but Elena understood. Lily was trying to say hello back. Elena felt tears prick her eyes but blinked them back furiously. She wouldn't cry, not now, not when she needed to be strong and professional. Instead, she smiled, a real smile this time, not the careful, polite one she gave to everyone else, and signed, "I see you." Lily's face transformed. It was like watching the sun break through storm clouds. Her eyes lit up, her mouth curved into a smile that showed tiny white teeth, and suddenly she was wiggling in her father's arms, reaching toward Elena with desperate enthusiasm. "What did you do?" Jacob's voice was rough, almost broken. "What did you say to her?" Elena turned to him, her own voice barely audible. "I told her hello. I told her I see her." "You know sign language." It wasn't a question. Jacob was staring at her as if she'd performed a miracle. "Yes." Elena reached out slowly, and Lily practically launched herself from her father's arms into hers. The child's small hands immediately went to Elena's face, touching her cheeks, her chin, her lips, trying to understand this person who spoke her language, who understood her world. Jacob stood there, his empty arms still held out, looking lost. She hasn't smiled like that in 8 months. Not since the fever. I've hired tutors, brought in doctors from as far as Chicago. Everyone said she'd never learn, never connect, never be more than... He couldn't finish the sentence. Never be more than silent? Elena finished quietly, settling Lily on her hip. The child was now playing with the collar of Elena's dress, completely at ease. "Silence doesn't mean empty, Mr. Bennett. Your daughter is full of words. She just needs someone who speaks her language." For a long moment, Jacob simply stared at her. Then, to Elena's surprise, his eyes filled with tears that he blinked away quickly, turning his face toward the prairie as if the distant horizon required his immediate attention. "Can you teach her?" he asked finally, his voice still rough. "Can you reach her?" "I can try." Elena adjusted Lily in her arms, feeling the child's heartbeat against her own chest. "But Mr. Bennett, I need you to understand something. Lily isn't broken. She doesn't need to be fixed. She needs to be understood, to be met where she is. If you're looking for someone to make her hearing come back, to make her the daughter you had before the fever, no." Jacob turned back to her, and the intensity in his eyes made Elena take a step back. "I don't want to change who she is. I just want her back. I want to see her smile again, to know what she's thinking, to understand what she needs. Can you give me that?" Elena looked down at Lily, who was now making soft humming sounds, not words, but noise that suggested contentment. The other children had gathered in the schoolroom behind them, watching this strange scene with wide eyes and whispered questions. "I can teach her," Elena said finally, "and I can teach the other children to communicate with her, if you'll allow it. But Mr. Bennett, you should know, this won't be easy. Learning sign language takes time, dedication. Lily might progress quickly or slowly. There are no guarantees." "I understand." Jacob stepped closer, close enough that Elena could smell leather and soap and something else, maybe desperation, maybe hope. "Whatever you need, books, supplies, extra time, I'll pay for everything. Just help my daughter, Miss Harper, please." Elena wanted to tell him that his money didn't matter, that she would have helped Lily regardless of who her father was. But she was practical enough to know that resources would make her job easier. So instead, she simply nodded. "We'll start today," she said, "if you'll leave Lily with me." For a moment, Jacob hesitated. Elena could see the conflict in his face, the desire to stay, to watch, to protect his daughter from any possible harm. But then he reached out and gently touched Lily's golden curls, his hand shaking slightly. "Be good, little flower," he whispered, even though his daughter couldn't hear him. Then he looked at Elena. "I'll be back at 3 o'clock. We'll be here." Jacob walked away slowly, looking back twice before he finally climbed into an expensive buggy and drove off toward what Elena assumed was his ranch. She watched him go, feeling the weight of responsibility settle onto her shoulders. This man had just handed her his most precious possession, trusting her with the daughter he clearly loved more than life itself. Elena carried Lily into the schoolhouse, where 15 other children waited with varying degrees of curiosity and restlessness. She set the little girl down gently in a desk at the front of the room, then turned to face her new students. "Good morning," she said, her voice still quiet but somehow carrying in the small space. "My name is Miss Harper, and I'm very happy to be your teacher this year." A boy in the back, Tommy Fletcher, she remembered, raised his hand. "Miss Harper, why was Mr. Bennett here? He don't usually come to town." "Doesn't," Elena corrected gently. "And Mr. Bennett brought his daughter, Lily, to school." "But she's deaf," a girl said, Sarah Yates, one of the twins. "How's she going to learn anything?" Elena felt every eye in the room turn to Lily, who sat perfectly still in her desk, her hands folded, her expression distant again now that Elena wasn't directly engaging with her. The weight of their stares, even though Lily couldn't hear the cruel question, made Elena's heart hurt. "Lily is deaf," Elena agreed, walking to stand beside the little girl's desk. "But that doesn't mean she can't learn. It just means she learns differently. And this year, all of you are going to learn something different too." She raised her hands and signed, "Hello," again, her fingers moving slowly through the air. The children watched with fascination. "This is how Lily talks," Elena explained, "with her hands. It's called sign language, and it's just as real and meaningful as the words we speak out loud. Over the next few weeks, I'm going to teach all of you some basic signs so that you can communicate with Lily. Would you like that?" The response was mixed. Some children leaned forward with interest. Others looked skeptical. Tommy Fletcher, who was clearly the class troublemaker, rolled his eyes. "That seems like a waste of time," he said. "We got real subjects to learn." Elena felt her face flush, but she kept her voice steady. "Communication is the most important subject there is, Tommy. Without it, we can't share ideas, solve problems, or understand each other. Learning to communicate with Lily isn't a waste of time. It's an opportunity to become better human beings." She spent the rest of the morning teaching the children the manual alphabet, 26 hand shapes, one for each letter. Most of the students followed along with enthusiasm, their hands forming clumsy versions of the letters. Even Tommy participated, though he made a show of sighing dramatically every few minutes. But it was Lily who truly shone. The 4-year-old watched Elena's hands with absolute focus, then mimicked the shapes with surprising accuracy. When Elena signed the letter L, Lily's small hand formed a perfect replica. When Elena moved on to I, Lily followed immediately. By the end of the lesson, the child could spell her own name, her fingers dancing through the letters with obvious pride. Elena's heart swelled. This was why she taught. Not for the prestige or the comfortable salary. Teachers certainly didn't earn much of either. She taught for moments like this, when a child's face lit up with understanding, when learning became joy rather than obligation. At lunch, the children scattered into the yard with tin pails full of bread and cheese and apples. Elena took Lily outside as well, spreading a blanket under a cottonwood tree. She'd packed extra food that morning, somehow knowing she'd need it, and now she shared her lunch with the little girl while using every opportunity to sign. "Apple," she signed, holding up the red fruit. A-P-P-L-E. Lily's eyes tracked the movement, then she reached for the apple and took a bite, juice running down her chin. She smiled at Elena and signed something that wasn't quite right but was clearly an attempt at "thank you." "Close," Elena signed back, then showed her the correct movement. Lily tried again, getting it perfect on the second attempt. They were so absorbed in their silent conversation that Elena didn't notice the audience gathering until she heard the whispers. "Would you look at that? The Bennett girl is actually learning something. That new teacher must be some kind of miracle worker." Elena looked up to find several townspeople standing at the edge of the schoolyard, watching with expressions ranging from amazement to suspicion. Among them was an older woman in an expensive dress, her gray hair perfectly coiffed, her mouth pressed into a line of disapproval. "Miss Harper," the woman's voice cut through the prairie air like a whip. "I'm Mrs. Thornton, head of the school board. Might I have a word?" Elena's stomach dropped, but she nodded, quickly signing to Lily to stay put and eat her apple. The child obeyed, though her eyes followed Elena anxiously. Mrs. Thornton led her several yards away, far enough that the children wouldn't overhear, but close enough that Elena could still see Lily. "I've heard some interesting things this morning," Mrs. Thornton began, her eyes cold despite the warmth of the day. "Jacob Bennett was seen leaving the schoolhouse, looking more animated than he's been in months, and now I see his daughter actually engaging with you. Quite remarkable." "Thank you," Elena said quietly, though something in Mrs. Thornton's tone suggested this wasn't a compliment. "I wonder, Miss Harper, if you understand the delicate position you're in." Mrs. Thornton clasped her hands in front of her ample bosom. "Jacob Bennett is the wealthiest man in 3 counties. He owns most of the land around Red Willow Creek, employs half the men in this town. He is also a widower who has been extremely protective of his daughter since his wife died in childbirth." Elena felt cold despite the September sunshine. "I don't understand what you're implying, Mrs. Thornton." "Don't you?" The older woman's eyebrows rose. A young, unmarried teacher, barely more than a girl herself, suddenly becomes the answer to Jacob Bennett's prayers? Suddenly forms a miraculous connection with his lonely daughter? I'm sure you can see how that might appear to certain people. "I'm here to teach," Elena said, her whisper voice somehow finding steel. "That's all. Lily is deaf, and I happen to know sign language. There's nothing miraculous or suspicious about it. Perhaps." Mrs. Thornton's gaze swept over Elena, taking in her plain dress, her too tight hair, her complete lack of feminine wiles. "But you would do well to remember, Miss Harper, that this town talks. And once people start talking, it becomes very difficult to control the narrative. I suggest you maintain appropriate boundaries with Mr. Bennett and his daughter. Teach the child if you must, but don't forget your place." She walked away before Elena could respond, leaving her standing alone in the schoolyard, shaking with suppressed anger and hurt. "Don't forget your place." Elena had heard those words her entire life. At the orphanage, when she dared to dream of college. From the headmistress at her first teaching position in Boston, when she'd suggested new methods. From the world at large, which seemed to believe that quiet girls from nowhere should be grateful for whatever scraps they received. But looking across the yard at Lily, who was now attempting to sign Apple to a curious Sarah Yates, Elena felt something shift inside her. Maybe it was time to forget her place. Maybe it was time to make a new place entirely. The afternoon passed in a blur of lessons. Elena taught reading and arithmetic, geography, and penmanship. And through it all, she incorporated signs, simple ones that the children could learn while absorbing their regular studies. The letter A for apple in spelling lessons, the sign for 2 during mathematics, the gesture for book when discussing their readers. Most of the children took to it with enthusiasm. A few, like Tommy Fletcher, remained skeptical. But even Tommy couldn't completely hide his fascination when Elena spelled out his full name in sign language, her hands moving too quickly for him to follow. "Do it again," he demanded. "Slower this time." Elena complied, and this time Tommy's hands tried to mirror hers, stumbling through THOMAS. At 3 o'clock exactly, Jacob Bennett's buggy appeared in front of the schoolhouse. Elena had kept Lily by her side all afternoon, teaching her simple signs between lessons with the other children. Now the little girl sat contentedly at Elena's desk, drawing pictures with careful concentration. Jacob climbed the steps slowly, his eyes immediately finding his daughter. "How was she?" "Perfect," Elena said simply. "She learned 20 letters of the alphabet, 3 colors, and the signs for eat, drink, and home. She's remarkably bright, Mr. Bennett." "She is, isn't she?" Jacob's face transformed when he looked at Lily, all his careful control melting away into pure love. "I always knew that, even when everyone else said—" He stopped, shook his head. "Thank you, Miss Harper." "Truly." Lily looked up then, sensing the vibration of footsteps on the wooden floor. When she saw her father, Her face lit up again, that same transformation Elena had witnessed that morning. But instead of simply reaching for him, Lily raised her small hands and signed something. It was clumsy, imperfect, but unmistakable. HELLOPAPA. Jacob froze. His mouth opened, then closed. His eyes filled with tears that this time he didn't try to hide. "She called me Papa," he whispered, his voice breaking. "She signed it. She called me Papa." "I taught her this afternoon," Elena explained softly. "I thought you'd want to know that word." Jacob knelt down, putting himself at Lily's eye level. His hands hung awkwardly at his sides, clearly unsure how to respond in his daughter's language. Elena stepped forward and guided his fingers into the right position, showing him how to sign "I love you." His hands were larger than hers, calloused from work despite his wealth, and they trembled as they formed the signs. But when Lily saw the message, she threw her arms around his neck, burying her face in his shoulder. Over the child's golden head, Jacob looked at Elena. "Teach me," he said. "Please, teach me how to talk to my daughter." Elena felt that crack in her chest widen further. "Of course." That evening, after all the other children had gone home and Jacob had carried a sleepy Lily to his buggy, Elena sat alone in the schoolhouse and allowed herself to feel everything she'd been holding back all day. The joy of watching Lily blossom, the hurt of Mrs. Thornton's veiled accusations, the terror of hoping that maybe, just maybe, she'd found a place where she could make a real difference. She pulled out her sign language manual and opened it to a random page. The illustrations looked back at her, hands frozen in meaningful gestures, communication captured in still images. Elena traced one drawing with her fingertip, remembering Margaret, remembering the loneliness of being different, remembering how it felt to finally be understood. Outside, the prairie wind whispered through the grass. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to the emerging stars. And in that one-room schoolhouse, Elena Harper made a decision that would change everything. She would teach these children. All of them, but especially Lily. She would give them the gift of communication, of connection, of understanding. She would show this town that silence wasn't emptiness, that different didn't mean less, that a 4-year-old girl who couldn't hear was still full of wisdom and wonder and worth. And if Mrs. Thornton and her gossips wanted to talk, let them talk. Elena had spent her whole life being invisible, being forgettable, being the quiet girl in the corner. Maybe it was time to be seen, truly seen, even if that visibility came with consequences. The next morning, Elena arrived at the schoolhouse early to find a package waiting on her desk. Inside was a thick stack of paper, several boxes of colored pencils, and a note written in bold, masculine handwriting. "For whatever you need, supplies, books, anything at all, just send word. Jacob Bennett." Elena ran her fingers over the expensive paper, the beautiful pencils. She knew accepting these gifts would only fuel the gossip, would give Mrs. Thornton more ammunition for her insinuations. But she also knew that Lily needed resources, needed materials that Elena's small teacher's salary couldn't provide. She kept the supplies. Over the next 2 weeks, a routine developed. Every morning, Jacob brought Lily to school, his hands forming more confident signs each day. Every afternoon, he returned to collect her, spending a few minutes asking Elena questions about signs and techniques. And every day, Lily bloomed a little more, her small hands becoming more articulate, her eyes more focused, her smile more frequent. The other children progressed too. Sarah Yates proved to have a natural talent for signing, her fingers quick and graceful. Her twin brother Samuel was slower but determined. Even Tommy Fletcher, despite his protests, learned enough to hold simple conversations with Lily during recess. But it was the way the children included Lily that truly moved Elena. She watched Sarah take Lily's hand during a game of tag, signing the rules so the younger girl could play. She saw Samuel share his lunch with Lily, signing cookie and trade before offering half his dessert. She even caught Tommy teaching Lily a slightly inappropriate sign for stupid during recess, then quickly teaching her smart when he noticed Elena watching. The classroom was transforming into exactly what Elena had dreamed, a place where every child felt seen, where differences were bridges rather than barriers, where silence and sound existed together in harmony. Then the whispers started. Elena first heard them at the general store, where she'd gone to purchase thread for mending her dresses. Two women stood near the fabric section, their voices loud enough to ensure she heard every word. "Did you see Jacob Bennett this morning? Actually smiling. I haven't seen him look that happy since before Margaret died. It's that new teacher. She's done something to him, mark my words. Oh, it's not him she's after. It's his money. Why else would a girl like that go to all this trouble for a deaf child? You think she's using the daughter to get to the father? What else could it be? She arrives in town with nothing, suddenly becomes indispensable to the richest man in 3 counties? It's calculated, I tell you." Elena's hands shook so badly that she dropped the spool of thread she'd been holding. It rolled across the floor, coming to rest at the feet of one of the gossiping women, who looked at her with barely disguised contempt. "Miss Harper," the woman said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "we were just talking about what wonderful work you're doing with the Bennett girl. Such dedication." The word dedication sounded like an accusation. Elena picked up her thread, paid quickly, and fled the store. She made it back to the boarding house before the tears came. Angry tears, hurt tears, tears that tasted like every time she'd ever been misunderstood or judged unfairly. That night she wrote a letter of resignation. The words came easily, shaped by years of practice at disappearing when she became inconvenient. "Dear members of the school board, I regret to inform you that I must resign my position as teacher of Red Willow Creek School, effective at the end of this month. Personal circumstances make it impossible for me to continue. I apologize for any inconvenience. Sincerely, Elena Harper." She sealed the envelope and set it on her dresser, telling herself she'd deliver it in the morning. It was better this way. Better to leave before the gossip grew worse, before her presence damaged Lily's reputation or Jacob's standing in the community. Better to return to being invisible, to find another town where she could teach quietly and cause no trouble. But in the morning, when she went to get the letter, it was gone. Elena searched frantically through her room, thinking perhaps it had fallen behind the dresser or gotten mixed in with her other papers. But it was nowhere to be found. Someone had been in her room. Someone had taken her letter. She was still searching when Mrs. Pritchard called up the stairs. "Miss Harper, you'll be late for school." Elena had no choice but to abandon her search and run to the schoolhouse. She arrived breathless and flustered, with no letter of resignation and no idea who had taken it or why. The children were already in their seats, including Lily, who sat at her desk with perfect posture, her hands folded, her eyes bright with anticipation. Elena's heart clenched. How could she leave this child? How could she abandon Lily when they'd only just begun? But how could she stay when every day brought new whispers, new accusations, new proof that she would never truly belong in this town? Elena was so lost in these thoughts that she almost missed the knock at the schoolhouse door. She looked up to find Jacob Bennett standing in the entrance, and in his hand was a familiar envelope. Her letter. "Mr. Bennett," Elena said, her voice barely audible even in the quiet room. "That's private correspondence." "Is it?" Jacob's eyes were hard, his jaw set. "Mrs. Pritchard found it on your dresser this morning. She was worried, so she brought it to me. I opened it, I read it, and now I'd like to know why you're running away." The children were watching with wide eyes, sensing drama even if they didn't understand the details. Elena felt her face burn with embarrassment and anger. "This isn't the time or place. When is the time, Miss Harper? After you disappear in the middle of the night, after my daughter loses the only person who's ever truly understood her?" Jacob's voice was rising, losing its careful control. "You think I don't know what people are saying about you? About us?" Elena flinched. So he did know. Of course he knew. A man like Jacob Bennett would hear every whisper, every speculation. "Then you understand why I have to leave," she said quietly. "For Lily's sake, if nothing else. The gossip will only get worse." "The gossip is wrong." Jacob stepped fully into the schoolhouse, and Elena saw that he was holding another piece of paper. "This is a letter to the school board, officially requesting that you be given a raise and additional resources to develop a comprehensive signing program for the school. I'm also donating funds to purchase a proper library and new equipment. And I'm doing it publicly, Miss Harper, with my name attached, so everyone in this town knows exactly how valuable I think you are as a teacher." Elena stared at him, unable to process his words. "You can't do that. It will only make things worse." Worse for whom? Jacob's eyes flashed. Not for Lily. She's happier than she's been in 8 months. She laughs now. Did you know that? She laughs even though she can't hear the sound of it. Because you taught her that joy doesn't require sound. He walked to his daughter's desk and placed a hand on her shoulder. Lily looked up at him and signed, Papa happy? Jacob signed back, slowly, imperfectly, but clearly, yes, Papa happy. Then he turned back to Elena. You asked me once to see my daughter as she is, not as I wish she would be. Now I'm asking you to see yourself the same way. Stop running from who you are, Miss Harper. You're an extraordinary teacher. You're changing lives. Don't let small-minded gossips take that away from you. Don't let them take it away from Lily. Elena felt tears streaming down her face. She never cried in front of people, never showed this kind of vulnerability. But Jacob's words had shattered something inside her, some old, scarred-over wound that had never properly healed. I don't know how to fight them, she whispered. I've never been good at fighting. Then don't fight them. Jacob's voice softened. Just keep doing what you're doing. Keep teaching. Keep being brilliant. The truth has a way of revealing itself, Miss Harper. Let your work speak for you. He placed her resignation letter on her desk, then very deliberately tore it in half. Don't run, he said again. Masul, please. Then he left, walking out of the schoolhouse with his head high, leaving Elena standing at the front of the classroom with her face wet and her hands shaking and 15 pairs of eyes watching her with varying degrees of understanding. Lily raised her small hand and signed, Teacher sad? Elena wiped her tears and signed back, Teacher okay, teacher staying. The smile that bloomed on Lily's face made every whisper, every cruel word, every moment of doubt worth enduring. Elena didn't run. She stayed. And though she didn't know it yet, her decision to remain in Red Willow Creek would set in motion a chain of events that would test every ounce of courage she possessed, and ultimately prove that the quietest voices sometimes speak the loudest truths. The weeks that followed Jacob's public declaration were both the best and worst of Elena's teaching career. Every morning brought new discoveries in the classroom, Lily mastering complex sentences and sign language, the other children creating their own signed conversations during recess, even shy Samuel Yates volunteering to demonstrate signs during lessons. But every afternoon brought fresh evidence that the town's opinion of Elena Harper was hardening like clay in a kiln. Mrs. Thornton's prediction had come true. The town was talking. Elena first noticed the change at church the following Sunday. She'd made a habit of sitting in the back pew, arriving late and leaving early to avoid conversation. But that morning, when she slipped into her usual spot, the family sharing the pew immediately gathered their belongings and moved to another row. Elena sat alone in the sudden space, feeling the weight of dozens of eyes on her back. After the service, she overheard 2 women near the door. Shameless, if you ask me, using that poor child to sink her hooks into Jacob Bennett. Well, what did we expect? She came from nothing. These types always have an angle. Elena walked past them with her head high, but once she reached the privacy of her boarding room, she sat on her bed and stared at her hands. These hands that could speak so eloquently in silence, that could reach Lily when no one else could. The town saw them as grasping, manipulative tools. Monday morning brought a surprise. When Elena arrived at the schoolhouse, she found a basket on the steps filled with fresh bread, jam, and a handwritten note. For Miss Harper, with gratitude. Your work matters. The Yates family. Elena clutched the note to her chest, feeling tears prick her eyes. At least some families understood. At least some people could see past the gossip to the truth. Inside the classroom, Sarah Yates was already there, helping Lily practice the signs for the days of the week. The 2 girls sat close together, their hands moving in synchronized patterns, Sarah's face patient and encouraging as Lily struggled with Wednesday. Good morning, girls, Elena said, setting the basket on her desk. Sarah looked up and grinned. Mama wanted you to know we don't believe the mean things people are saying. She says you're the best teacher we've ever had. Tell your mother thank you. That's very kind. It's true, though. Sarah's expression turned serious. Tommy Fletcher's mama says you're just pretending to care about Lily to get her papa's money. But I watch you with her. You care for real. Anybody with eyes can see that. Elena's throat tightened. That means more than you know, Sarah. Lily had been watching their conversation with focused attention, trying to read their lips. Now she tugged on Elena's sleeve and signed, "What talking about?" Elena knelt beside the little girl's desk. "Sarah's mother sent us breakfast. Isn't that kind?" Lily's face lit up. She signed back, "Share with everyone?" "Of course we can share." When the other children arrived, Elena divided the bread and jam among them, turning Mrs. Yates's kindness into a lesson about community and generosity. Even Tommy Fletcher, who'd been increasingly sullen lately, accepted his portion with something approaching gratitude. But at noon, when the children scattered for lunch, Tommy approached Elena's desk with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Miss Harper, I need to tell you something." "Of course, Tommy." "What is it?" The boy shifted his weight from foot to foot, looking more uncomfortable than Elena had ever seen him. "My mama's been saying things about you, bad things, about how you're trying to trap Mr. Bennett into marrying you by being nice to his daughter." Elena felt the familiar sting of those accusations, but she kept her voice gentle. "I know people are saying that, Tommy. It's not true, but I understand that some folks need to make sense of things in their own way. But here's the thing." Tommy's voice dropped to a whisper. "Mama told me I should stop learning the sign language, said it was a waste of time and that I was supporting your scheme by participating." Elena's stomach dropped. "I see. But I don't want to stop." The words came out in a rush. "I like being able to talk to Lily. She's actually real smart when you can understand her. And yesterday she taught me the sign for friend, and it made me feel—" He trailed off, his young face struggling with complex emotions. "It made you feel connected," Elena finished softly. "Yeah, that." Tommy looked at his feet. "So I told Mama I wasn't going to stop learning, even if she thinks you're awful. She got real mad, said I was being disrespectful. But Miss Harper, you're not awful. You're just quiet and nice and good at teaching. Why are people being so mean?" Elena pulled out a chair and sat down, gesturing for Tommy to do the same. Through the window, she could see the other children playing in the yard, their laughter carrying on the autumn breeze. "Sometimes, Tommy, people get scared when they see something they don't understand. I'm different from other teachers. I'm young, I'm unmarried, and I communicate in ways that seem strange to folks who've never seen sign language before. And Mr. Bennett is an important man in this town, important and very protective of his daughter. Some people think those two things together must mean something suspicious. But you're just teaching. I know. And you know. And Lily knows. Sometimes that has to be enough." Elena managed a small smile. "But Tommy, I don't want to cause trouble between you and your mother. If she truly wants you to stop learning to sign, I'll understand." The Tommy's jaw set in a stubborn line that reminded Elena of his father, a farmer known for his determination. "No, ma'am. I'm 13 years old, almost a man. I can make some of my own choices, and I choose to keep learning." After Tommy returned to the yard, Elena sat alone in the quiet classroom, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing down on her shoulders. She was affecting these children's lives in ways that extended far beyond the schoolhouse walls, creating ripples that reached into their homes, their families, their understanding of the world. Was it worth it? Was teaching Lily and the others sign language worth dividing the town? She thought of Lily's smile, of the way the child's eyes lit up when she successfully communicated a complex thought. She thought of Sarah's patience, Tommy's determination, all the small bridges being built between hearing and deaf, sound and silence. Yes, it was worth it. That afternoon, Jacob arrived early to collect Lily. He climbed the schoolhouse steps with his usual confident stride, but Elena noticed the tension in his shoulders, the tightness around his eyes. "Mr. Bennett, you're early today. I wanted to speak with you before the other parents arrived." He glanced at Lily, who was showing Samuel a picture she'd drawn of a horse. "Can we step outside?" Elena's heart hammered as she followed him onto the porch. The prairie stretched before them, golden in the late afternoon light, beautiful and indifferent to human drama. "I've been hearing things," Jacob began without preamble. "Mrs. Fletcher came to my ranch yesterday. She said you were teaching her son to go against his mother's wishes. She accused you of turning the children against their parents." Elena felt her face flush. "That's not what happened. Tommy chose to continue learning sign language despite his mother's objections. I offered to respect her wishes, but he refused." I know. Jacob's expression softened slightly. I also heard from Mrs. Yates, who told me the opposite story, that you're inspiring her children to be more compassionate and inclusive. The problem is, Miss Harper, the town is splitting into factions, those who support your methods and those who think you're overstepping. Maybe I am overstepping. The words came out before Elena could stop them. Maybe teaching sign language to the whole class is too much, too fast. Maybe I should just work with Lily privately and leave the other children out of it. No. Jacob's response was immediate and firm. Lily needs peers who can communicate with her. She needs to be part of a community, not isolated as some special case. What you're doing is exactly right. Then why do you look so troubled? Jacob ran a hand through his dark hair, messing the careful styling. Because I'm worried about you. The gossip is getting crueler. Yesterday at the general store I heard Mrs. Thornton tell someone that you were practically living at my ranch, that I'd been seen visiting you alone at the schoolhouse after hours, that it was only a matter of time before scandal erupted. Elena felt sick. But none of that is true. You bring Lily in the morning and collect her in the afternoon, always when other children are present. We've never been alone together except right now, Jacob finished grimly, which is exactly the kind of thing they'll twist into something improper. They stood in silence for a moment, both painfully aware that this conversation itself would likely fuel more speculation. Elena could see Mrs. Henderson across the street, pausing in her walk to watch them with undisguised interest. I should go back inside, Elena said quietly. Wait. Jacob caught her arm gently, then immediately released it as if the touch had burned him. I want you to know something. I don't care what they say about me. I'm used to being talked about. It comes with money and position. But I do care what they're saying about you. You don't deserve this, Miss Harper. You're doing nothing wrong. Except being young and unmarried and good at my job. A ghost of a smile crossed Jacob's face. Yes, those are apparently cardinal sins in Red Willow Creek. His expression sobered again. But there's something else you should know. The school board is meeting next week. Mrs. Thornton is called for a review of your teaching methods and what she calls the appropriateness of your conduct. Elena's breath caught. They're going to fire me. Not if I have anything to say about it. I'm the largest donor to the school. My voice carries weight. Which is exactly what they're accusing me of exploiting. Elena felt trapped, caught in a web not of her own making. Don't you see, Mr. Bennett? Your defense of me only proves their point in their minds. Every time you speak up for me, every donation you make, every public show of support, it all feeds the narrative that I'm using Lily to manipulate you. Then what do you suggest I do? Stay silent while they destroy your reputation? I don't know. The words came out louder than Elena intended, sharp with frustration and fear. Inside the schoolhouse, several children's heads turned toward the window. Elena lowered her voice. I don't know what the right answer is. All I know is that I came here to teach, and somehow I've become the center of a scandal I never wanted or asked for. Jacob's gray eyes searched her face. Do you regret it? Taking this position? Teaching Lily? Elena thought of Lily's laugh, the way the child had learned to express herself, the light that had returned to her eyes. She thought of Sarah's kindness, Tommy's determination, all the small victories that made teaching worthwhile. No, she said finally. I don't regret it, but I'm afraid of what comes next. So am I, Jacob admitted. But, Miss Harper, fear is a poor reason to stop doing what's right. He went inside to collect Lily, leaving Elena standing on the porch, watching the prairie wind bend the grass in rippling waves. She wondered if she was strong enough for what was coming. She'd spent her whole life avoiding conflict, staying quiet, making herself small. Now the universe seemed determined to thrust her into the spotlight, whether she wanted it or not. That evening, Elena received an unexpected visitor at the boarding house. Mrs. Pritchard knocked on her door after supper with an apologetic expression. Miss Harper, there's a Mrs. Bennett downstairs asking to see you. Elena's heart skipped. Mrs. Bennett? But Jacob's wife is dead, yes. This would be his mother, Mrs. Catherine Bennett. She's waiting in the parlor, and between you and me, she looks like a woman on a mission. Elena descended the stairs with dread pooling in her stomach. She found the elder Mrs. Bennet seated ramrod straight on the parlor's best chair, a woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and eyes that could cut glass. Everything about her spoke of old money and older expectations. "Miss Harper," Mrs. Bennet didn't rise or offer her hand. "Please sit." Elena perched on the edge of a chair opposite her unexpected guest. "Mrs. Bennet, this is a surprise." "I'm sure it is. I don't normally make social calls, particularly not on young women of questionable judgment." The older woman's tone could have frozen fire. "However, circumstances require us to speak plainly." "I'm listening." "My son has become attached to you, or rather, attached to what you represent, hope for his daughter. I watched him lose his wife in childbirth, watched him nearly destroy himself, trying to reach a child he could no longer understand. Then you arrived, and suddenly Lily was communicating again, smiling again. Jacob saw you as an answer to prayer." Elena said nothing, sensing there was more to come. "The problem, Miss Harper, is that Jacob is confusing gratitude with something else. He sees you every day. He watches you with his daughter, and he's a lonely man who hasn't looked at a woman since Margaret died." Mrs. Bennet leaned forward. "I'm not blind. I've seen the way he looks at you." Elena's face burned. "Mrs. Bennet, I assure you, I'm not accusing you of encouraging it. In fact, I suspect you're too naive to even notice. But the town has noticed, and Mrs. Thornton has made it her mission to ensure everyone knows that the new teacher is setting her cap at the richest widower in the territory. I have no such intentions. I believe you, but intentions matter very little in the face of perception." Mrs. Bennet's expression softened fractionally. "Miss Harper, I'm going to be frank with you. You're a good teacher. Lily adores you, and I haven't seen her this happy since before the illness. Under different circumstances, I would be the first to defend you. But my primary concern is my granddaughter's well-being. If your presence here creates a scandal that damages the Bennet family reputation, it will ultimately hurt Lily. Children are cruel to children of disgraced families. I won't have my granddaughter suffering because of town gossip about her teacher." Elena felt as if the floor had dropped away beneath her. "You want me to leave?" "I want you to consider what's best for everyone involved. The school board meeting is in 5 days. Mrs. Thornton will almost certainly call for your dismissal. My son will defend you, which will only make things worse. The town will divide further, and in the end, Lily will be caught in the middle. So I should just give up? Let them win?" Mrs. Bennet stood, gathering her expensive shawl around her shoulders. "I'm asking you to think about what winning actually looks like, Miss Harper. Is it keeping your position while the town tears itself apart? Or is it protecting a child you claim to care about?" After she left, Elena sat in the empty parlor for a long time, watching shadows lengthen across the floor. Mrs. Bennet's words echoed in her mind, mixing with Mrs. Thornton's accusations. The whispered gossip, Tommy's defense, Sarah's loyalty. Everyone had an opinion about what Elena should do, who she should be, what her motives were. But what did Elena herself want? She'd spent so long trying to be invisible, to avoid causing trouble, that she'd forgotten how to fight for anything. The orphanage had taught her to be grateful for scraps. Her first teaching position had taught her to never question authority. Every experience had reinforced the lesson. People like Elena Harper didn't make waves, except she had made waves, big ones, and now people were drowning in them. The next 3 days passed in a blur of tension. Elena taught her classes mechanically, going through the motions while her mind churned with impossible decisions. The children sensed something was wrong, even Lily, who watched Elena with increasingly worried eyes. On Wednesday afternoon, Sarah Yates stayed after class to help clean the blackboard. As they worked in comfortable silence, the girl suddenly spoke. "Miss Harper, are you leaving us?" Elena's hand froze mid-wipe. "Why would you think that?" "Because you look like my aunt did before she left Montana to go back east. Sad and scared and like you're already somewhere else in your head." Sarah set down her eraser and faced Elena directly. "The other kids have been talking. They say the school board is going to fire you because Mrs. Thornton thinks you're trying to marry Mr. Bennet." "Sarah, but that's stupid. You're not trying to marry anybody. You're just teaching Lily and the rest of us." "Why is that wrong?" Elena sank into her chair, suddenly exhausted. It's complicated, Sarah. It's not complicated, it's just mean. The girl's voice was fierce with conviction. Mama says sometimes people would rather tear down something beautiful than admit they were wrong. She says Mrs. Thornton has been jealous of the Bennets for years because they have more money and standing, so now she's taking it out on you. Your mother is very wise. She also says you shouldn't let them chase you away. But you're thinking about leaving, aren't you? Elena looked at this brave, perceptive child and decided she deserved honesty. I'm thinking about what's best for Lily and for all of you. If my staying causes more harm than good, how could teaching us cause harm? Sarah's eyes filled with frustrated tears. You've taught me to talk with Lily. You've shown Tommy that being kind is stronger than being mean. You've made this whole classroom better. How is that harmful? Before Elena could answer, the schoolhouse door burst open. Jacob stood in the doorway, his face pale, his breathing ragged as if he'd been running. Elena. Her name came out raw, urgent. I need you to come with me. Now. It's Lily. Elena's heart stopped. What happened? She wandered away from the house. We can't find her. I've had ranch hands searching for 2 hours, but the prairie... His voice broke. She can't hear us calling. If she's hurt or lost, she won't be able to tell us. Please. You understand her better than anyone. Help me find my daughter. Elena didn't hesitate. She grabbed her shawl and ran toward Jacob's waiting horse, with Sarah racing behind them. I can help search too, the girl called. Jacob helped Elena onto the horse, then swung up behind her. Get your father and brothers, Sarah. Tell them to meet us at the Bennett Ranch. We need everyone. They rode hard across the prairie, the wind whipping Elena's hair loose from its pins. She was pressed against Jacob's chest, could feel his heart hammering with fear, but there was no time to worry about propriety or gossip. Somewhere out there, a 4-year-old girl was alone and silent in a vast, indifferent landscape. Tell me everything, Elena said over the thunder of hooves. When did you last see her? 2 hours ago, she was playing in the garden while I met with my foreman. When I looked again, she was gone. We found her doll near the fence line, but no other trace. Was she upset about anything? Worried? I don't know. I don't know. The words were anguished. I should have been watching her more carefully. I should have... This isn't helping. Elena forced her voice to stay calm, even as her own terror mounted. Think, Jacob. Where does Lily like to go? What makes her happy? A pause, then... Water. She loves the creek. She likes to watch the way it moves. How far is the creek from your house? About a mile north, but we already searched there. Search again. If she's anywhere, that's where she'll be. They reached the Bennett Ranch, a sprawling complex of barns and outbuildings surrounding a grand house that spoke of generations of wealth. Ranch hands milled about, looking grim. Mrs. Bennett emerged from the house, her composed face cracking when she saw Elena. Have you found her? Not yet, Jacob said, dismounting and helping Elena down. We're going back to the creek. Elena thinks... I don't care what she thinks. The older woman's control finally shattered. This is your fault, Miss Harper. If you hadn't made my granddaughter so confident, so independent, she never would have wandered off alone. The accusation hit Elena like a physical blow, but she had no time to defend herself. Mrs. Bennett, I understand you're frightened, but right now we need to find Lily. Blame me later. Jacob was already remounting. Mother, organize search parties. Have them fan out from the house in all directions. Elena and I will take the creek. They rode north through tall grass that whispered and swayed, hiding 1,000 dangers. Elena's mind raced through scenarios, each worse than the last. Lily could have fallen, injured herself, be lying somewhere unable to call for help. She could have gotten turned around, lost in the sameness of the prairie. She could have encountered a snake, a wild animal, any number of threats. The creek appeared suddenly, a ribbon of water cutting through the grass, its banks lined with cottonwood trees. Jacob dismounted and called his daughter's name, even though they both knew it was useless. Spread out, Elena said, sliding from the horse. I'll go downstream, you go up. If she's here, we'll find her. Elena walked along the creek bank, her eyes scanning every shadow, every cluster of bushes. The water burbled peacefully, indifferent to her panic. Above, the sun was beginning its descent, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. In a few hours, darkness would fall, making the search nearly impossible. Please, Elena thought, please let her be safe. She'd walked perhaps a quarter mile when she saw it, a flash of white among the green and brown of the landscape. Elena's heart leaped as she ran toward it, stumbling over rocks and roots in her haste. Lily sat at the water's edge, her white dress muddy and torn, her golden curls tangled with leaves. But she was alive, conscious, seemingly unhurt. The little girl was focused intently on the water, watching minnows dart through the shallows, completely unaware that she'd caused a crisis. Elena approached carefully, not wanting to startle her. When she was close enough, she stepped into Lily's line of sight and signed, "Hello, little one?" Lily looked up and her face broke into a radiant smile. She signed back, "Miss Elena, look, fish." Relief flooded through Elena so powerfully that her knees nearly buckled. She knelt beside the child and pulled her into a fierce hug, not caring that Lily was muddy and wet. "Your papa is very worried," Elena signed when she pulled back. "We've been searching for you." Lily's smile faded. "Papa worried? Why?" "Because you left without telling anyone where you were going. We didn't know if you were safe." The child's eyes filled with tears. "I wanted to see fish. I didn't mean to make Papa sad." "I know, but Lily, you have to tell someone when you go places. You're too young to wander alone." Elena stood and waved both arms over her head, hoping to catch Jacob's attention. Within moments, she heard the thunder of hooves, and then Jacob was there, throwing himself from his horse and gathering his daughter into his arms. He held her so tightly that Lily squirmed, signing protest that neither Jacob nor Elena acknowledged. They were too overwhelmed with relief, too grateful that this story had ended without tragedy. Finally, Jacob loosened his grip enough to sign clumsily, "Never do that again, never." Lily nodded solemnly, understanding that she'd done something serious even if she didn't fully grasp why. They rode back to the ranch together, Lily cradled in her father's arms, Elena sitting behind them, her arms wrapped around them both to keep from falling. As they crested the final hill, Elena saw the crowd that had gathered. The Yates family was there, along with the Fletchers and at least a dozen other townspeople who'd joined the search. Mrs. Bennet ran forward as they dismounted, tears streaming down her face as she reached for her granddaughter. "Thank heavens! Oh, thank heavens!" Sheriff Dawson approached, his relief evident. "We heard you found her, Bennet. Everyone can head home now." But the crowd didn't disperse. They stood watching as Jacob held his daughter, as Mrs. Bennet fussed over Lily's torn dress, as Elena tried to quietly fade into the background. Then Tommy Fletcher's voice rang out across the yard. "Miss Harper found her. She knew right where to look." Mrs. Fletcher's face pinched. "Lucky guess." "No, Mama. She understood Lily. She knew what would make her happy, where she'd want to go. Nobody else thought of that." Other voices joined in, some supportive, others skeptical. The crowd that had come together to search was fracturing again along familiar lines. Mrs. Thornton stepped forward, her expression calculating. "It's certainly fortunate that Miss Harper was available to help. Though one might wonder if the child would have developed such dangerous independence if she hadn't been encouraged to be so self-reliant." Elena felt the accusation like a slap. Before she could respond, Jacob's voice cut through the murmurs. "My daughter is alive because Elena Harper understands her in ways no one else does. That's not encouraging dangerous behavior, that's providing the kind of education every child deserves." He turned to face the crowd, Lily still in his arms. "I'm grateful to everyone who came to help search, but I'm especially grateful to Miss Harper, who not only found Lily, but has given her a life worth living." Mrs. Thornton's eyes narrowed. "Your gratitude is noted, Mr. Bennet, as is the fact that Miss Harper seems to have become quite essential to your family." The implication hung in the air, ugly and unmistakable. Elena saw the exact moment Jacob understood what was being suggested. His face darkened with anger. "If you have something to say, Mrs. Thornton, say it plainly." "Very well. The school board meets tomorrow to discuss Miss Harper's future at our school. I suggest everyone attend. It seems we have much to discuss about appropriate conduct and professional boundaries." She swept away, taking several of her supporters with her. The remaining townspeople dispersed slowly, leaving Elena standing in the ranch yard feeling exposed and vulnerable. Mrs. Bennett approached, her earlier gratitude already cooling. Miss Harper, I believe you should leave. Jacob will send someone to take you back to town. Mother, Jacob began. No, this has gone far enough. The older woman's voice was steel wrapped in velvet. Miss Harper, you've been kind to my granddaughter, and I'm grateful you found her today, but your presence is tearing this community apart. Tomorrow's board meeting will only make things worse. Elena knew she was right. She also knew that leaving now, slinking away after finding Lily, would only confirm everyone's worst suspicions. I'll attend the board meeting, she said quietly. I deserve the chance to defend myself. And what will you say? Mrs. Bennett challenged. That you haven't grown attached to my son? That he hasn't become dependent on you? That this entire situation isn't exactly what it appears to be? It appears to be a teacher doing her job, Elena said, finding a core of strength she didn't know she possessed. That's all it is, and that's all it's ever been. She left before anyone could respond, accepting a ride back to town from Sheriff Dawson. They traveled in silence until they reached the boarding house. For what it's worth, Miss Harper, the sheriff said as she dismounted, I think you're getting a raw deal. You're a fine teacher. My niece has learned more in 2 months with you than she did in 2 years with the last teacher. Thank you, Sheriff. That means a great deal. But I'll tell you what I tell everyone in this territory. Sometimes the right thing and the smart thing aren't the same thing. You have to decide which one matters more to you. Elena climbed to her room and sat on her bed, still wearing her muddy dress, her hair wild from the wind. Tomorrow, she would face the school board. Tomorrow, she would have to defend her methods, her intentions, her very presence in Red Willow Creek. But tonight, she let herself feel the weight of it all, the fear, the anger, the bone-deep exhaustion of being misunderstood. Through her window, she could see the prairie stretching endlessly under the stars. Somewhere out there, Lily was safe and warm, probably already asleep. And that, Elena realized, was worth any price. Even this one. The morning of the school board meeting dawned gray and cold, with clouds pressing low over the prairie like a heavy blanket. Elena dressed with shaking hands, choosing her most conservative dress, a dark blue cotton with a high collar that made her look even younger than her 23 years. She braided her hair tightly, pinning it in a severe bun that pulled at her temples. In the mirror, she looked like a woman preparing for battle, which she supposed she was. Mrs. Pritchard knocked softly before entering with a cup of tea. You didn't eat breakfast? I couldn't. Well, drink this at least. You'll need your strength. The boarding house keeper set the cup on the dresser, her weathered face sympathetic. I've lived in Red Willow Creek for 30 years, Miss Harper. I've seen my share of witch hunts disguised as town meetings. Don't let them break you. What if they're right? The words escaped before Elena could stop them. What if I have caused more harm than good? That little Bennett girl would say different. I saw her face when her papa brought her into town yesterday. She was signing to everyone she met, excited as a lark. You gave that child a voice, Miss Harper. Don't you forget that. After Mrs. Pritchard left, Elena sat for a long moment, sipping the tea and trying to steady her nerves. The board meeting wasn't until 7 o'clock that evening, which meant she had an entire day of teaching to get through first. She wondered if the children knew what was happening, if their parents had discussed it over breakfast tables throughout the town. The walk to the schoolhouse felt longer than usual. Every person Elena passed seemed to stare, to judge, to have already formed their opinions. Mrs. Henderson turned away deliberately when Elena nodded a greeting. Mr. Cooper at the general store watched her through his window with an expression she couldn't read. But when Elena reached the schoolhouse, she found Sarah and Samuel Yates sitting on the steps, waiting. Sarah stood as Elena approached, her young face set with determination. We wanted to be here early, to show you we're on your side. Elena's throat tightened. That's very kind, Sarah, but you don't have to choose sides. Yes, we do. Samuel spoke quietly, so unlike his usually silent nature. Mama says sometimes you have to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. You're a good teacher, Miss Harper, the best we've ever had. Before Elena could respond, more children began arriving. Not just the usual students, but older siblings and younger ones too, families making a statement with their presence. The Fletcher children came, despite their mother's disapproval, Tommy walking with his chin raised defiantly. The Yates clan arrived in force, Mr. and Mrs. Yates nodding solemnly to Elena. Even families who'd have been neutral came, their children running to greet Elena with an enthusiasm that felt like protection. Only one family was conspicuously absent. Jacob's buggy didn't appear at 8 o'clock. Lily's desk sat empty, a small void in the front row that Elena tried not to stare at. She taught that day with a focus born of desperation. Every lesson was perfect, every explanation clear, every moment of instruction deliberate and measured. She wanted these children to remember this day, to know that whatever happened tonight, their teacher had given them her very best. During arithmetic, she had the students practice counting in sign language, their hands forming numbers while their voices spoke them aloud. During reading, she told them a story about a deaf boy who saved his village by noticing things others couldn't hear, vibrations in the ground that warned of danger. The children listened with rapt attention, especially Tommy, who'd begun to see his signing skills as something valuable rather than merely different. At lunch, Elena sat at her desk rather than joining the children outside. She was reviewing her notes for the evening's meeting when she heard footsteps on the porch. Her heart leapt, hoping for Jacob and Lily, but it was Sheriff Dawson who appeared in the doorway. "Miss Harper, got a minute?" "Of course, Sheriff." He removed his hat, turning it in his hands with obvious discomfort. "I wanted to give you fair warning. Mrs. Thornton's been collecting signatures on a petition. She's got near about 40 names demanding your removal." Elena felt the blood drain from her face. 40? Some of them are folks who don't even have children in school, but they're concerned citizens, or so they claim. He paused. There's also a counter-petition. Mrs. Yates started it yesterday after Lily was found. She's got maybe 20 signatures supporting you. 20 against 40. The numbers told their own story. "Thank you for letting me know, Sheriff." "There's something else." He shifted his weight, looking even more uncomfortable. "Jacob Bennett sent word that he won't be attending the meeting tonight. Says he doesn't want his presence to influence the proceedings unfairly." Elena's hands clenched in her lap. "I see. For what it's worth, I think he's making a mistake. You could use someone speaking on your behalf who carries weight in this town. His mother already made it clear that his support only hurts my case. Perhaps he's being wise." After the sheriff left, Elena stood at the window watching the children play. They divided into groups for a game of tag, and she noticed that Tommy had modified the rules so Lily's absence didn't disrupt the game. He'd taught the others to tap each other instead of just calling out, "You're it," a consideration that wouldn't have occurred to him 2 months ago. These small changes, these quiet shifts in how children saw the world, weren't they worth fighting for? The afternoon crept by with agonizing slowness. Elena taught grammar and geography, her voice steady even as her hands trembled when she wrote on the blackboard. At 3 o'clock, parents began arriving to collect their children, and Elena felt the weight of their stares, their whispered conversations just outside her hearing. Mrs. Fletcher came for Tommy and his younger sister. The boy hesitated at the door, looking back at Elena with worried eyes. "Will we see you tomorrow, Miss Harper?" "I hope so, Tommy." "You better be here. I still need to learn the sign for birthday. Mine's next week." After the last child left, Elena sat alone in the empty schoolhouse, watching dust motes dance in the slanting sunlight. She thought about the first day she'd arrived, how this room had seemed like sanctuary. Now it felt like a courtroom where she'd already been found guilty. At 6:30, she walked to the town hall, a larger building near the church that served for community gatherings. Through the windows, she could see people already assembling, filling the rows of chairs, their faces animated with the kind of excitement that came from watching someone else's crisis unfold. Elena paused outside, gathering her courage. She could leave now. She could walk to the boarding house, pack her single suitcase, and catch tomorrow's train to anywhere else. No one could stop her. No one could force her to endure this public trial. But she thought of Lily's smile, of the way the child's hands had moved through the air, forming words, forming thoughts, forming connections to a world that had almost lost her. She thought of Sarah's loyalty, Tommy's growth, all the small miracles that had happened in that one-room schoolhouse. She couldn't leave, not without fighting. Elena pushed open the door and walked inside with her head high. The room fell silent as people turned to watch her enter. She made her way to the front where 5 chairs sat behind a table. The school board members, already in position. Mrs. Thornton sat in the center chair, her expression smugly satisfied. The other 4 members looked variously uncomfortable, curious, or hostile. Miss Harper. Mrs. Thornton's voice carried easily through the room. How good of you to join us. Please, take a seat. A single chair sat facing the board, positioned so that Elena would have her back to the crowd. She sat carefully, folding her hands in her lap to hide their shaking. We're here tonight to discuss concerns that have been raised about your teaching methods and conduct, Mrs. Thornton began. Several members of our community have expressed worry that you are overstepping appropriate boundaries, both in your curriculum and in your personal associations. Do you have anything to say before we hear from the concerned citizens? Elena's mouth was dry. I'd like to hear the specific charges against me before I respond. Mrs. Thornton smiled thinly. Very well. Mrs. Fletcher, would you like to begin? Tommy's mother stood, her face pinched with righteous anger. My son has been learning this sign language instead of focusing on proper subjects. When I told him to stop, he defied me, saying his teacher had made it important. Miss Harper is teaching children to disobey their parents. I never told any child to disobey their parents, Elena said quietly. I offered to respect your wishes, Mrs. Fletcher. Tommy chose to continue learning on his own. Because you made him feel guilty for not doing so. You've manipulated these children into thinking sign language is necessary when it's nothing but a parlor trick to make yourself seem indispensable. Other voices joined in, building on each other's accusations. Mr. Henderson claimed Elena was spending too much time on Lily Bennett at the expense of other students. Mrs. Collins insisted that teaching sign language was taking time away from mathematics and proper English. On and on it went, a litany of complaints that all circled back to the same theme. Elena was different, therefore dangerous. Through it all, Elena sat silent, letting the words wash over her. She'd learned long ago that defending yourself against people who'd already decided you were guilty was pointless. Better to let them exhaust themselves. Finally, Mrs. Thornton raised a hand for silence. And what of the more serious charge, Miss Harper? The accusation that you've cultivated an inappropriate relationship with Jacob Bennett under the guise of helping his daughter? Elena lifted her chin. I have a professional relationship with Mr. Bennett as the parent of one of my students, nothing more. Yet he's been seen visiting you alone at the schoolhouse after hours. He arrives with other parents when collecting his daughter. Any conversations we've had have been about Lily's education. He's made substantial donations to the school on your behalf. He's made donations to benefit all the students, not just me. He rode alone with you across the prairie yesterday to search for his lost child. Would you have had me refuse to help? Mrs. Thornton leaned forward, her eyes glinting. I would have had you maintain appropriate boundaries, Miss Harper. Instead, you've inserted yourself into the Bennett family in a way that many find questionable. A young, unmarried woman becoming essential to a wealthy widower, surely you can see how that appears. I can see how it appears to people determined to see something improper. Elena felt her control slipping, anger finally breaking through her careful composure. But their dirty minds don't make my actions dirty. I'm a teacher doing my job. If that threatens you, Mrs. Thornton, perhaps the problem isn't with me. Gasps rippled through the crowd. No one spoke to Mrs. Thornton that way. The older woman's face flushed red. How dare you? The door at the back of the hall burst open with a bang that made everyone jump. Jacob Bennett stood in the entrance, his hair disheveled, his expensive coat missing, his face etched with panic. Fire! He shouted. The schoolhouse is on fire! For a moment, no one moved, too shocked to process his words. Then chaos erupted as people leaped from their chairs and rushed for the door. Elena ran with them, her heart hammering against her ribs. She could smell the smoke before she saw the flames, acrid and sharp, carried on the evening breeze. As they rounded the corner onto Miller Road, Elena saw orange light flickering through the schoolhouse windows, smoke pouring from gaps in the roof. Someone must have left the stove burning, Sheriff Dawson shouted, already organizing men to form a water line from the nearest well. Everyone who can carry a bucket, get moving. But Elena wasn't thinking about the building or the books or her carefully prepared lessons. She was thinking about the attendance register she kept in her desk drawer. the one that listed every student's name and address. She was thinking about the children's artwork pinned to the walls, their small accomplishments preserved in drawings and handwriting samples. She was thinking about the sign language manual wrapped in cloth at the bottom of her desk, the book that had been her connection to Margaret, her link to everything that mattered. She started toward the burning building. Jacob caught her arm. "Elena, no, it's too dangerous." "My things are in there. The children's work, it's just things. They can be replaced." But Elena pulled free, driven by something stronger than logic. That schoolhouse held more than belongings. It held proof that she'd mattered, that she'd made a difference, that these months in Red Willow Creek had meant something. She ran up the steps and through the door before anyone could stop her. The heat hit her like a physical wall, stealing her breath. Smoke filled the room, thick and choking, making her eyes stream. The flames had started near the stove in the corner and were spreading across the wooden floor with horrifying speed. Elena dropped to her hands and knees where the air was clear and crawled toward her desk. She could hear shouting behind her, people calling her name, but it sounded distant and unimportant. Her hand found the desk drawer and yanked it open. The attendance register was there, and beneath it, her precious manual. She grabbed both books and turned to crawl back out. But in the few seconds it had taken to reach her desk, the fire had spread. Flames now blocked the doorway, reaching toward her with hungry orange fingers. Elena's mind went blank with terror. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't... Movement caught her eye. Through the smoke, through the impossible heat, she saw a small figure huddled beneath a desk in the far corner. A figure with golden curls and a white dress. Lily. Time seemed to stop. Elena understood in that instant what must have happened. Lily had hidden in the schoolhouse, perhaps playing after hours, perhaps drawn back by some childish impulse. She'd been there all along, trapped by flames she couldn't hear, confused by smoke she didn't understand. Elena didn't hesitate. She dropped the books and crawled toward the child, her lungs screaming for air, her skin burning from the heat. When she reached Lily's desk, she found the little girl curled into a tight ball, her eyes squeezed shut, her hands pressed over her ears as if she could block out danger she couldn't hear. Elena pulled Lily into her arms, shielding the child's face against her shoulder. She needed to get them both out, needed to find a way past the flames, but the fire had spread too far. The doorway was completely blocked now, and the windows were too high for Elena to reach while carrying Lily. They were trapped. Elena's teaching instincts took over. She positioned herself between Lily and the worst of the flames, using her body as a shield. The child was coughing now, struggling against Elena's grip, terrified and confused. Elena pulled back just enough to make eye contact, to position her hands where Lily could see them. She signed one word: "Run." Lily shook her head frantically, clinging to Elena's dress. Elena signed again, more forcefully, pointing toward the door, even though she knew they couldn't reach it. She had to make Lily understand that she needed to try, needed to save herself even if Elena couldn't follow. "Run," she signed one final time. "Don't give up." Then the ceiling beam above them cracked with a sound like thunder. Elena looked up just in time to see it falling, trailing sparks and smoke. She pushed Lily with all her strength, sending the child rolling across the floor away from the impact point. The beam hit Elena's shoulder and back, driving her to the floor under its crushing weight. Pain exploded through her body, white-hot and all-consuming. She felt her hands, her precious hands, slam against the burning floorboards, felt flesh meet fire. Through the pain, Elena saw Lily scrambling to her feet, saw the child's mouth open in a scream Elena couldn't hear over the roar of the flames. She tried to sign "run" again, but her hands wouldn't obey. They were a mass of agony, useless and broken. The last thing Elena saw before darkness claimed her was Jacob Bennett crashing through a window, glass shattering around him, his arms reaching for his daughter. The last thing she felt was relief that Lily would be safe. Then there was nothing but fire and pain and the certain knowledge that she was going to die. She woke to the smell of smoke and the sound of sobbing. Her entire body felt like one massive burn, every nerve screaming in protest. She tried to move and couldn't, tried to speak and managed only a weak groan. "She's awake!" The voice was young, female, Sarah Yates. "Dr. Morrison, she's awake!" Footsteps approached, and then a weathered face swam into view above her. Dr. Morrison, the town physician, looked tired and grim. Miss Harper, can you hear me? Elena managed a tiny nod, even that small movement sending pain cascading through her. You're at the Bennett Ranch. Jacob carried you out of the fire. You've been unconscious for 3 hours. The doctor's expression was grave. You have severe burns on your back and shoulders, some smoke damage to your lungs. But Miss Harper, your hands... Elena tried to lift them, to see for herself, but they were wrapped in thick bandages. Even the attempt to move them sent such sharp pain through her arms that she gasped. The burns on your hands are severe, Dr. Morrison continued quietly. 2nd and 3rd degree in places. I've done what I can, but Miss Harper, you need to understand, there's a good chance you'll never regain full use of them. The damage to the nerves and tendons. Elena heard the words as if from a great distance. Her hands. The hands that spoke when her voice wouldn't. The hands that had reached Lily, that had connected her to the world, that had been her greatest gift. Gone. Lily? The word came out as barely a whisper. Safe, thanks to you. Dr. Morrison's voice softened. Jacob said you shielded her with your own body, pushed her out of the way when the beam fell. You saved that child's life, Miss Harper. Where is she? Right outside with her father. They've been waiting for you to wake up. The doctor stood, his joints creaking. I'll let Jacob know you're conscious, but Miss Harper, you need to rest. Your body has been through a tremendous trauma. After he left, Elena lay staring at the ceiling, trying to comprehend the magnitude of what she'd lost. Without her hands, how could she teach sign language? How could she communicate with Lily? How could she be anything other than a burden, a broken thing to be pitied? The door opened softly. Jacob entered first, carrying Lily in his arms. The little girl's face was clean but streaked with the tracks of old tears. Her dress changed, but her eyes still wide with residual fear. When Lily saw Elena, she struggled in her father's arms, reaching toward the bed with desperate hands. She was signing frantically, Miss Elena, scared, hurt, sorry," the words tumbling over each other in her panic to communicate. Jacob set her down gently on the bed beside Elena, careful not to jar the injured woman. Lily immediately curled into Elena's side, as close as she could get without touching the bandaged hands or burned shoulders. "The doctor says you'll recover," Jacob said, his voice rough with emotion he wasn't trying to hide. "But it will take time. Your hands especially—" "I know." Elena couldn't bear to hear the prognosis repeated. "How did she get in the schoolhouse?" "We think she snuck away from the ranch after I left for the meeting. She wanted to see you, to make sure you were all right. Mrs. Thornton had been telling people you'd be fired tonight, and somehow Lily heard about it. She was hiding in the schoolhouse, probably planning to surprise you when you returned from the meeting." Guilt crashed over Elena. If she'd never come to Red Willow Creek, Lily would never have been in danger. If she'd just accepted the town's judgment and left quietly, none of this would have happened. "This is my fault," she whispered. "Don't." Jacob's voice was sharp. "Don't you dare blame yourself. That fire started because someone didn't bank the stove properly. Probably one of the board members who used the schoolhouse for their meeting earlier in the week. And Lily was there because she loves you, because you've given her something precious. You're not to blame for anything, Elena. You're a hero." "I don't feel like a hero." Elena looked at her bandaged hands, useless lumps at the ends of her arms. "I feel like I've lost everything." Lily had been watching their conversation, trying to read their lips. Now she lifted her small hands and signed something, her movements precise and clear despite her young age. "Don't give up." Elena's breath caught. Those were the words she'd signed to Lily in the fire, her final message before the beam fell. The child had understood. She'd remembered. "She's been signing that all evening," Jacob said quietly. "Every time someone tries to comfort her, every time I tell her everything will be all right, she just signs those 3 words over and over." Elena wanted to respond, wanted to sign back that she wouldn't give up, that she'd find a way to recover. But her hands were trapped in bandages, and even if they weren't, the pain would have made signing impossible. For the first time in her life, Elena understood what it was like to be truly voiceless. Not quiet, not shy, voiceless. Unable to communicate in the way that mattered most, trapped in a silence that felt like suffocation. I can't sign to her, Elena said, tears spilling down her cheeks. I can't tell her I'm all right, that I understand, that I love. She stopped, horrified by what she'd almost said. But Jacob heard it anyway. Then I'll tell her for you. I'll learn to sign properly, to speak for you until your hands heal. Jacob, you don't understand. Dr. Morrison said I might never. I don't care what he said. You're going to recover because you're strong, because you don't give up, because. His voice broke. Because we need you, both of us. This town might not know it yet, but we need you. Through the window, Elena could see townspeople gathering in the yard below. Word must have spread about the fire, about Lily being rescued, about Elena's injuries. She recognized faces in the crowd. Mrs. Yates looking worried, Tommy Fletcher with his parents, even Mrs. Thornton standing apart from the others with an expression that might have been shame or might have been calculation. They're all talking about what happened, Jacob said, following her gaze. About how you ran into a burning building to save your belongings, then stayed to rescue Lily when you could have escaped. Sarah Yates has been telling everyone who will listen that you're a hero. Tommy Fletcher punched a boy who said you only went in there to make yourself look good. What will they think when they find out I can't teach anymore, when they realize I'm useless? You're not useless. Jacob moved closer to the bed, his storm gray eyes intense. You're the woman who taught my daughter to communicate. You're the teacher who changed an entire classroom's understanding of what it means to be different. You're the person who ran into fire without hesitation because a child needed you. Your hands don't define your worth, Elena. But they did. Elena knew they did. Without her hands, she was just the quiet girl again, the one who couldn't speak up, couldn't make herself heard. She'd built an entire identity around those hands, around the language they spoke. Who was she without them? Lily had fallen asleep against Elena's side, her small face finally peaceful. Jacob stood slowly, careful not to wake his daughter. You'll stay here while you recover, he said, making it a statement rather than a question. We have room, and you'll need round-the-clock care for a while. Dr. Morrison has already agreed to check on you daily. Jacob, I can't impose. You're not imposing. You saved my daughter's life. His voice turned fierce. You think I care what Mrs. Thornton or anyone else says about propriety? You're staying here where you'll be safe and cared for. That's final. After he left, Elena lay in the darkness with Lily curled against her, listening to the child's soft breathing. Through the door, she could hear voices, Jacob's deep rumble, his mother's sharp tones, Dr. Morrison's measured responses. They were arguing about her, about what should be done, about whether having Elena Harper in the Bennett house would cause more scandal than the town could bear. Elena closed her eyes and tried to imagine a future, tried to see past the pain and the bandages and the loss, but all she could see was darkness, as consuming and terrifying as the flames that had taken everything she valued. Outside, the prairie wind whispered through the grass, indifferent to human suffering. And in the wreckage of the schoolhouse, smoke still rose into the night sky like prayers no one was listening to. The first week at the Bennett Ranch passed in a haze of laudanum and pain. Elena drifted between sleep and waking, never quite sure which was real. The nightmares where she was trapped in fire forever, or the reality where her hands were wrapped in bandages that needed changing twice daily, each session an agony that left her gasping and sweating. Dr. Morrison came every morning, his face growing grimmer each time he unwrapped the bandages to check the wounds. Elena forced herself to look once on the third day, and immediately wished she hadn't. The burns were worse than she'd imagined. Angry red flesh, blistered and weeping, the skin of her palms and fingers damaged beyond recognition. Her beautiful, eloquent hands looked like something from a horror story. The infection is the biggest concern now, Dr. Morrison explained as he applied fresh salve, each touch of the cloth sending lightning bolts of pain up Elena's arms. If we can keep that at bay, you have a chance of regaining some mobility. But Miss Harper, you need to prepare yourself. Even in the best case, you're looking at months of healing, and the scarring will be significant. Will I be able to sign? The question came out flat, emotionless. Elena had moved past tears into a numb acceptance of her fate. The doctor hesitated just long enough to give her the answer. I don't know. The damage to the tendons in your fingers is extensive. Time will tell. Time. as if Elena had endless amounts of it to waste, waiting, hoping, praying for a recovery that might never come. Lily visited every day, climbing carefully onto the bed beside Elena, chattering in sign language that Elena could only watch, unable to respond. The child would sign stories about her day, the calf born in the barn, the new doll her grandmother had bought her, the way the cook had let her help make bread. And Elena would nod and smile, her silence now a prison rather than a choice. On the 8th day, Jacob appeared in her doorway carrying a wooden lap desk and several sheets of paper. He set them on the bed beside her, careful not to jar her injuries. "I thought you might like to write," he said. "I know your hands are bandaged, but perhaps if we prop the pen between your fingers—" "No." Elena's voice was sharper than she intended. "I can't. I tried yesterday when Dr. Morrison suggested it. I can't grip anything. I can't control the movement. All I managed to do was knock over the inkwell and make a mess." Jacob sat in the chair beside her bed, the one he'd occupied for hours during those first critical days when the doctor wasn't sure if the infection would spread. "You're healing, Elena. Every day Dr. Morrison says you're getting stronger. My body might be healing, but my hands—" Elena looked at the bandaged lumps, hating them. "These were everything to me, Jacob. They were how I connected to the world, how I mattered. Without them, I'm nothing." "That's not true, isn't it? What use is a teacher who can't write on a blackboard? What good is someone who claims to teach sign language but can't sign?" "I'm useless, Jacob. Worse than useless. I'm a burden." She expected him to offer more empty platitudes, more reassurances that rang hollow. Instead, he stood and walked to the door, closing it firmly. When he turned back, his face held an expression Elena had never seen before, something raw and almost angry. "You want to know what you are?" His voice was low but intense. "You're the woman who ran into fire to save my daughter. You're the teacher who transformed an entire classroom in 3 months. You're the person who saw worth in a child everyone else had written off. Your value doesn't come from your hands, Elena. It comes from who you are." "Who I was," Elena corrected bitterly. "That person is gone." Jacob crossed the room in 3 strides and knelt beside the bed, putting himself at her eye level. "No. That person is right here, feeling sorry for herself instead of fighting. Where's the woman who stood up to Mrs. Thornton? Where's the teacher who refused to run when the whole town turned against her?" "She died in that fire." Elena felt tears threatening but blinked them back furiously. "You don't understand, Jacob. My hands were my voice. Without them, I'm just the quiet girl again, the one no one sees or hears. I can't teach. I can't communicate with Lily. I can't be anything but a reminder of what I used to be able to do." "Then learn a new way." Jacob's hands moved as he spoke, forming clumsy but recognizable signs. "I've been studying. Every night after Lily goes to sleep, I practice. I'm not good yet, but I'm learning. And if I can learn to speak your language, you can learn to speak mine." Elena stared at him. "What are you suggesting?" "Use your voice. Actually speak to people instead of hiding behind sign language." "I don't hide." "You do. You've been hiding your whole life, Elena, using sign language as a shield because it's easier than making yourself vulnerable with spoken words. But you can't hide anymore. The shield is gone. So maybe it's time to find out who Elena Harper is when she can't retreat into silence." The words hit like a slap. Elena wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, that he didn't understand. But deep down, in a place she rarely examined, she knew he was right. She had hidden behind sign language, using it as an excuse to never fully engage, never risk being truly seen. "I don't know how to be that person," she whispered. "Then learn. The same way you learned sign language, the same way you learned to teach. You're one of the strongest people I've ever met, Elena. Don't let this break you." After he left, Elena lay staring at the ceiling, his words echoing in her mind. Could she do it? Could she find a voice that didn't rely on her hands? The prospect terrified her more than the fire had. That night, Lily brought her a gift, a slate and chalk, the kind young children used for practicing letters. The little girl placed it carefully on Elena's lap, then signed slowly, "Teacher, write?" Elena looked at the slate, at the piece of chalk lying beside it. She couldn't grip it with her bandaged hands, couldn't hold it the normal way. But maybe She maneuvered the chalk between the stiff fingers of her right hand, using the bandages themselves to create pressure. The pain was immediate and sharp, but Elena gritted her teeth and pressed the chalk to the slate. Slowly, agonizingly, she dragged it across the surface. The letter L appeared, shaky and malformed, but recognizable. Lily clapped her hands together, her face lighting up. She watched intently as Elena continued, each letter taking enormous effort, sweat beading on her forehead from the concentration and pain. Lily. The child threw her arms around Elena's neck, careful of the bandages on her shoulders. When she pulled back, she was crying and smiling at the same time. She signed, "Teacher, not broken." Those 3 words broke something open in Elena's chest. She pulled Lily close with her forearms, unable to hug properly but needing the contact. Maybe Jacob was right. Maybe she wasn't broken, just changed. Maybe there was a way forward that didn't require her hands to be what they were. Over the following weeks, Elena began the slow, painful process of rebuilding herself. Dr. Morrison gradually reduced the bandages, exposing healing skin that was pink and shiny with scar tissue. The fingers of her right hand had more mobility than the left, though even simple movements required tremendous effort and caused sharp pain. But Elena practiced. Using the slate and chalk, she relearned how to write, not with the flowing script she'd once possessed, but with blocky, childlike letters that required her to grip the chalk between her palm and the base of her thumb. It was humiliating work, watching her writing regress to something worse than her youngest students could produce. But she persisted. Mrs. Bennet watched these efforts with an expression that gradually shifted from cold disapproval to something resembling respect. The older woman had been icily polite since Elena's arrival, providing everything necessary for her care while making it clear this was duty, not welcome. But one afternoon, she appeared in Elena's room with a leather-bound journal and a pen modified with a thick wooden grip. "My husband had arthritis in his later years," she said without preamble. "He had this pen made so he could still write his letters. Perhaps it will help you." Elena took the pen carefully, testing the grip. The thick wooden handle fit more naturally against her scarred palm, distributing the pressure more evenly. When she tried to write, the letters came out slightly better than with the chalk. "Thank you, Mrs. Bennet." The older woman nodded stiffly. "My son tells me you're planning to resume teaching when the new schoolhouse is built." "I don't know if that's possible." "Why not? You can still speak, can't you? You can still read and think and plan lessons. Your hands don't define your ability to teach." Elena looked up, surprised by the echo of Jacob's words. "That's not what you said when you asked me to leave." "I said many things I regret." Mrs. Bennet's face softened fractionally. "I was afraid. Afraid of losing my son to another woman so soon after Margaret. Afraid of the gossip damaging Lily's future. Afraid of change. But watching you lie here, seeing how you fought to recover, how my granddaughter looks at you." She paused, gathering her words. "You saved Lily's life, Miss Harper. More than that, you gave her a life worth living. Whatever concerns I had about propriety seemed petty in comparison." After she left, Elena sat holding the modified pen, feeling the weight of unexpected acceptance. The town's opinion was shifting. Jacob had told her as much. Word of her sacrifice had spread, transforming the narrative from scandal to heroism. People who'd signed petitions demanding her removal were now bringing gifts to the Bennett ranch, their guilt manifesting as fruit preserves and knitted shawls. But Elena didn't want their guilt. She didn't want to be seen as a martyr or a saint. She just wanted to teach again. 6 weeks after the fire, Dr. Morrison declared her well enough to leave the bed for short periods. Jacob had a chair brought to the parlor, positioning it by the window where Elena could watch the prairie and the comings and goings of ranch life. Lily spent hours there with her, the two of them finding new ways to communicate. Elena couldn't sign properly. Her fingers were still too stiff, the movements too painful. But she could point, could gesture broadly, could use her limited mobility in combination with facial expressions and mouthed words. And Lily, brilliant child that she was, adapted quickly, learning to read Elena's lips with increasing accuracy. "When your hands heal," Lily signed one afternoon, "will you teach me new words?" Elena opened her mouth to give her usual non-answer, then stopped. She thought about Jacob's challenge to use her voice, to stop hiding. She took a breath and spoke, enunciating carefully so Lily could read her lips. Even if my hands don't heal completely, I can still teach you. We'll find a way. Lily watched her mouth intently, then signed back. Promise? I promise. It was during one of these afternoon sessions that Sarah Yates appeared at the door, shepherded in by Mrs. Bennett with obvious reluctance. The girl carried a basket covered with a cloth, and her face was tight with barely suppressed emotion. Miss Harper. She rushed to Elena's chair, then stopped short, suddenly uncertain. I'm sorry. I should have asked permission to visit. Mama said you might not want to see people yet. I'm very glad to see you, Sarah. How are your lessons going? The girl's face fell. We don't have a teacher right now. Mrs. Thornton tried to get the old teacher to come back, but she'd already taken another position, so we're just waiting. Some families are teaching their children at home, but it's not the same. I'm sorry to hear that. The new schoolhouse is almost finished, though. Mr. Bennett paid to have it built quickly. It's bigger than the old one, with more windows and a proper library corner. Sarah hesitated, then added quietly, Everyone's hoping you'll come back to teach when it opens, even some of the families who signed that petition. Lena looked at her scarred hands resting in her lap. I don't know if I can, Sarah. Teaching requires writing on blackboards, handling books, demonstrating proper penmanship. I can barely hold a pen. But you can still talk. You can still explain things and answer questions and make us understand difficult concepts. Sarah's voice grew passionate. The best thing about your teaching wasn't your handwriting, Miss Harper. It was the way you made every single student feel seen and valued. That doesn't require hands. After Sarah left, Elena sat in the growing twilight, watching the last light fade from the prairie sky. She thought about what the girl had said, about what made a teacher valuable. She thought about Lily's progress, about the connections forged in that one-room schoolhouse, about all the ways she'd made a difference that had nothing to do with perfect penmanship. Maybe she could teach again. Maybe not the way she had before, but in a new way that accommodated her limitations while building on her strengths. The door opened and Jacob entered, carrying Lily, who'd fallen asleep in his arms. He deposited his daughter gently on the settee, covering her with a blanket, then took the chair across from Elena. Sarah's visit has you thinking, he observed. How did you know? You have a particular expression when you're working through a problem. I've learned to recognize it. He paused. The new schoolhouse will be ready in 2 weeks. The board has asked me to approach you about resuming your position. Elena's heart jumped. Mrs. Thornton agreed to this? Mrs. Thornton has been ousted from the school board. After the fire, when it came out that she'd essentially driven you to that meeting where you weren't able to properly bank the stove, the other parents rebelled. She's been replaced by Mrs. Yates. Jacob smiled slightly. Your most vocal supporter is now in charge of school decisions. That doesn't mean I'm capable of teaching. Doesn't it? You've been teaching Lily every day. I've watched you adapt your methods, find new ways to communicate. If you can teach her, you can teach a whole classroom. Elena looked at Lily sleeping peacefully on the settee, her golden curls spilling across the pillow. What if I fail? What if I get into that classroom and freeze, unable to perform the basic tasks a teacher needs to do? Then you'll figure it out, the way you always do. Jacob leaned forward, his gray eyes intense. Elena, I've been learning sign language for 2 months now. I practice every night until my hands cramp and my brain feels like it might explode. Do you know why? For Lily. Partly, but also because I wanted to be able to communicate with you, because watching you lie there unable to sign, unable to express yourself in the way that came most naturally, it killed me. I wanted to give you a voice when yours was taken away. Elena's throat tightened. Jacob, let me finish. He stood and moved to kneel beside her chair, his hands lifting to sign as he spoke. I'm not good at this yet. My signs are clumsy and probably grammatically terrible, but I'm learning. For you. Because you matter to me, Elena. Not as my daughter's teacher. Not as some convenient solution to a problem. As you. His hands formed the sign slowly, carefully. I see you, the real you. Not the quiet girl hiding behind sign language. Not the martyr who sacrificed herself in fire. I see Elena Harper, strong, stubborn, brilliant, terrified of being truly seen, and I'm standing here telling you that you are seen. By me. by Lily, by this whole town, whether you believe it or not. Elena felt tears streaming down her face. I don't know how to accept that. I've spent my whole life being invisible. Then learn to be visible. The same way I'm learning to sign. It's scary and uncomfortable, and sometimes you'll mess up. But it's worth it, Elena. You're worth it. He reached out and gently took her scarred hands in his own, his touch careful and reverent. These hands saved my daughter's life. They gave her the ability to communicate when no one else could reach her. They're beautiful, Elena. Scars and all. Elena looked at their joined hands, his large and calloused, hers small and damaged. She thought about all the times she'd used sign language as a shield, all the moments she'd hidden behind gestures rather than risk speaking. She thought about the girl she'd been and the woman she was becoming. I'm terrified, she whispered. I know, but you don't have to be terrified alone. Jacob's voice was gentle. Let me help you. Let Lily help you. Let this town that's learned to value you help you. What if they only value me because of the fire? What if once the heroic glow fades, they go back to seeing me as the awkward girl who can't speak properly? Then we'll prove them wrong, together. Over the next 2 weeks, Elena prepared to return to teaching with the same determination she'd brought to learning sign language years ago. She practiced writing on a vertical surface, finding that if she used a thick piece of chalk and relied more on her shoulder movement than her fingers, she could produce legible letters on a blackboard. She worked with the modified pen Mrs. Bennett had given her, slowly building up enough control to write brief notes and corrections, and she practiced using her voice. Standing in front of the mirror in her room, Elena forced herself to speak clearly and loudly, to enunciate every word rather than mumbling or whispering. It felt unnatural, like wearing clothes that didn't quite fit, but Jacob was right. If she couldn't hide behind sign language anymore, she needed to find confidence in spoken words. Lily became her most enthusiastic supporter, applauding every small victory. When Elena managed to write an entire sentence on the practice board Jacob had installed in her room, Lily signed, "Teacher is best teacher." The day before the new schoolhouse was scheduled to open, Elena walked there alone. Jacob had offered to accompany her, but she needed to face this herself. The building stood proud and white in the autumn sunshine, larger than its predecessor, with real glass in the windows and a solid bell tower. Elena climbed the steps slowly, her hands trembling. Inside, everything smelled of fresh wood and paint. The desks were arranged in neat rows, a large blackboard dominated the front wall, and shelves of brand-new books lined one side of the room. In the corner sat a beautiful wooden cabinet with glass doors. Inside, Elena could see sign language materials, illustrated charts showing hand positions for every letter and common words. A plaque on the cabinet read, "In honor of Miss Elena Harper, who taught us that silence speaks louder than words." Elena traced the letters with her scarred fingers, feeling tears prick her eyes. Someone, probably Jacob, had ensured that sign language would remain part of the curriculum, that the work she'd started wouldn't be forgotten. It's beautiful, isn't it? Elena turned to find Mrs. Yates standing in the doorway, her kind face smiling. Mrs. Yates, I didn't hear you come in. I wanted to see the schoolhouse before tomorrow. And to tell you something. The older woman approached, her expression serious. I know you're worried about teaching with your injuries. I know you think you might not be good enough anymore. But Miss Harper, you transformed my children's lives in 3 months. Sarah talks about you constantly. Samuel, who barely spoke before, now signs entire conversations. You didn't do that with perfect handwriting or fancy techniques. You did it by caring, by seeing each child as an individual worth reaching. That's kind of you to say. It's the truth. And tomorrow, when you walk into this classroom, those children will see their teacher, the woman who believed in them, who fought for them, who literally walked through fire for them. Your scarred hands won't matter to them, Miss Harper. Only your heart does. That night, Elena lay awake in her room at the Bennett Ranch. She'd stayed there throughout her recovery, the arrangement becoming so natural that no one questioned it anymore. Through the wall, she could hear Lily's soft breathing from the adjacent room. Downstairs, the house creaked and settled into darkness. Elena held her hands up in the moonlight streaming through the window, examining them as if seeing them for the first time. The scars were vivid against her pale skin, ridges and valleys of healed burns, fingers that would never quite straighten completely, palms that would always feel tight and uncomfortable. They were ugly by any conventional standard, damaged beyond full repair. But they were hers. They had saved Lily. They had communicated love and learning to countless children. They had reached across the silence and built bridges. Maybe that was enough. Maybe being perfect had never been the point. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the first real bite of winter in the air. Elena dressed carefully in a new dress Mrs. Bennet had commissioned, a deep green that brought out the color of her eyes, with sleeves designed to accommodate her scarred hands without hiding them. At breakfast, Jacob and Lily were already at the table. The little girl bounced in her seat when she saw Elena, signing rapidly. "First day! Teacher's first day!"
"Yes?" Elena said aloud, speaking clearly enough for Lily to read her lips. "My first day back. Are you ready to be a student again?" Lily nodded enthusiastically, then paused. Her small hands formed careful signs. "Scared?" Elena thought about lying, about presenting a brave face, but she'd spent too long hiding behind false fronts. "Yes," she admitted. "I'm very scared, but I'm going anyway." "Like fire," Lily signed. "Scared, but going anyway." The simple parallel took Elena's breath away. Yes, exactly like the fire. Scared, but going anyway. Maybe that was what courage actually was. Not the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward despite it. Jacob drove them to the schoolhouse in the buggy, the three of them bundled against the cold. As they approached, Elena could see families already gathering, parents with their children, everyone dressed in their Sunday best for this first day at the new school. When the buggy stopped, Elena sat frozen for a moment, unable to make herself move. So many eyes, so much expectation. What if she failed? What if her damaged hands couldn't manage the physical demands of teaching? What if... Lily's small hand slipped into hers, the touch gentle against her scars. The child looked up at her with absolute trust, absolute certainty that everything would be all right. "Don't give up," Lily signed with her free hand. Elena took a deep breath and stepped down from the buggy. The crowd parted as she walked toward the schoolhouse, everyone watching, everyone waiting to see if the burned teacher could actually do what she'd come to do. Elena felt their stares like physical weight, felt the old urge to shrink, to hide, to disappear. Instead, she raised her head and walked through that door. Inside the new schoolhouse, the children were already seated, their faces turned toward Elena with expressions ranging from joy to curiosity to concern. Sarah Yates sat in the front row, her smile encouraging. Tommy Fletcher was in his usual spot near the back, but for once he wasn't slouching. He sat upright, attentive. Samuel Yates had saved the desk beside him for Lily, who quickly claimed it after giving Elena's hand one final squeeze. Elena walked to the front of the classroom, her scarred hands visible to everyone. She could feel their eyes on the pink, shiny tissue, the fingers that didn't quite straighten, the palms that looked like melted wax. The old Elena would have hidden them in her sleeves, would have found a way to make herself smaller, less noticeable. The new Elena set them on the desk in front of her where everyone could see. "Good morning," she said, her voice carrying more strongly than it ever had before. Not loud, but clear. Present. "I'm sure you've all noticed that I look different than I did before the fire. My hands were badly burned, and they don't work the way they used to. I can't sign as fluently as before, and my handwriting will never be as neat. But I can still teach, and you can still learn if we're willing to adapt together." She picked up the thick piece of chalk and turned to the blackboard. Her hand shook as she raised it, and for a terrifying moment she thought she might not be able to do it. Then she felt the weight of their expectation, not judgment, but hope, and she pressed the chalk to the board. The letter W appeared, wobbly but readable. Then ELCOME. She'd misspelled it, left out the first L, but she kept going. BACK. Behind her she heard a small sound, half laugh, half sob. She turned to see Sarah Yates wiping her eyes, grinning through tears. "Welcome back to you too, Miss Harper," the girl said. The morning proceeded with a rhythm Elena hadn't known she could establish. She couldn't write extensive notes on the board, so she spoke more, encouraging discussion rather than simple recitation.
She couldn't demonstrate signs with her usual fluidity, so she had the children who'd learned them show the newer students, turning them into teachers themselves. When her hands cramped from gripping the chalk too long, she sat on the edge of her desk and told them stories instead, about the origins of language, about different ways people communicated across cultures, about how limitations could become innovations if you approached them with creativity rather than defeat. The children hung on every word. Even Tommy, who'd always been restless, sat still and engaged. And Lily glowed with pride, occasionally standing to demonstrate a sign when Elena's hands couldn't manage the complexity. At lunch, Elena stayed at her desk while the children scattered to the yard. She was exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical exertion and everything to do with the emotional energy required to be fully present, fully visible. Her hands throbbed, and she could feel the beginning of blisters forming where the chalk had rubbed against still healing skin. But she'd done it. She'd taught an entire morning successfully. The door opened and Jacob entered, carrying a basket. "Mrs. Bennet sent lunch. She was worried you'd forget to eat." "I probably would have." Elena accepted the basket gratefully, wincing as her fingers struggled with the latch. Jacob knelt and opened it for her, pulling out bread and cheese and a jar of soup still warm from the Bennet kitchen. As he laid out the food, he said quietly, "I watched through the window for a few minutes. You were magnificent." I misspelled welcome on the blackboard, and then kept going instead of trying to hide it.
Do you know what that taught those children? That mistakes aren't failures. They're just part of the process.
He poured soup into a cup and handed it to her carefully. "Elena, I've been thinking about something, about what happens next." "Next? You're still staying at the ranch. We've been telling people it's temporary until you're fully recovered. But you are recovered, at least enough to live independently, and people are starting to talk again." Elena's stomach dropped. Of course, she'd been so focused on returning to teaching that she hadn't considered the propriety of her living arrangement. An unmarried woman residing in the home of an unmarried man, it didn't matter that Mrs. Bennet was there as chaperone or that everything had been perfectly proper. People would talk. "I'll find other accommodations," she said quietly. "Mrs. Pritchard might have room again at the boarding house." "That's one option." Jacob sat in one of the student desks, looking absurdly large in the small chair. "Or there's another possibility. One I've been considering for weeks but wasn't sure how to raise." Elena set down her soup cup, suddenly unable to eat. "What possibility?" Jacob stood and walked to the window, looking out at the children playing. When he spoke, his voice was careful, measured. "Lily needs you, not just as a teacher, but as a constant presence in her life. She's lost one mother already. I won't put her through losing another important woman if I can help it." "Jacob, I'm not her mother, I'm her teacher. You're more than that, and you know it. You're the person she runs to when she's excited or scared. You're the one she wants to tell about her day. You're the person who understands her in ways I'm still learning." He turned to face Elena. "And you're the woman I've fallen in love with, though I know the timing is terrible, and the circumstances are complicated, and you probably think I'm confusing gratitude with something else." Elena's breath stopped. "You can't. We barely know each other. We've spent nearly every day together for the past 2 months. I've watched you fight through pain and doubt and fear. I've seen you at your most vulnerable and your most courageous. I know you prefer your tea with honey, that you sing quietly to yourself when you think no one's listening, that you cry at night sometimes when the pain is bad but never complain during the day. I know you're stubborn and proud and terrified of being a burden. I know you, Elena, and I love you. You love what I did for Lily. You love the idea of having someone who can communicate with your daughter." "I love you," Jacob repeated firmly. The woman who hid behind sign language because speaking felt too vulnerable. The woman who ran into fire without hesitation. The woman who's relearning everything she thought defined her. "I love all of it, Elena. All of you." Elena stood, her legs shaking. "I can't give you what you want. I can't be a replacement for Margaret. I can't be the perfect society wife your position requires. I'm damaged, Jacob, permanently. So am I. I'm a widower raising a deaf daughter in a town that loves to gossip. I'm terrified every day that I'm failing her, that I'm not enough. But with you, I feel like maybe we could be enough together." He crossed the room to stand in front of her. I'm not asking you to replace Margaret. I'm asking you to be Elena, exactly as you are, scars and all. And let me love you for it. The town will never accept it. They'll say I manipulated you, that I used Lily to trap you into marriage. Let them say it. I don't care anymore, Elena. I spent the first year after Margaret died caring desperately what everyone thought, trying to maintain appearances, trying to be the person everyone expected. It nearly destroyed me. I'm done living for their approval. His hands lifted, forming signs she'd taught him months ago. I see you. Do you see me? Elena looked at this man who'd learned an entire language just to communicate with her, who'd defended her when the town turned against her, who'd sat by her bedside during the worst of her recovery. She saw the loneliness in his eyes that matched her own, the fear of being truly vulnerable, the desperate hope that maybe this time, love wouldn't end in loss. I see you, she whispered. Then, signing with her damaged hands despite the pain, I see you. Then give us a chance. Not because Lily needs you or because the town expects it or because it's practical. Give us a chance because you want to, because you feel something for me beyond professional obligation. Did she? Elena had been so careful not to examine her feelings too closely, afraid of what she might find. But standing here, looking into Jacob's storm-gray eyes, she couldn't deny the truth any longer. She'd fallen in love with him somewhere between that first day when he'd brought Lily to school and this moment where he was offering her everything she'd been too afraid to want. I'm terrified, she admitted. Good, so am I, but we can be terrified together. Jacob smiled slightly. That's better than being terrified alone. Before Elena could respond, the school bell rang. Tommy Fletcher had taken it upon himself to signal the end of lunch. Through the window, they could see children streaming back toward the building, Lily leading the pack with Sarah beside her. I need to teach, Elena said. I know, but think about it, Elena, please. Jacob headed toward the door, then paused. The spring festival is in 3 months. If you decided you wanted to attend it with me, not as Lily's teacher, but as the woman I'm courting, I'd be honored. He left before she could answer, passing the children as they flooded back into the classroom. Elena stood at the front, trying to collect her scattered thoughts. Jacob Bennett had just declared his love for her, had asked her to consider a future together. The idea was terrifying and thrilling in equal measure. Lily signed from her desk. Teacher happy? Papa was here. Elena managed a smile. Yes, sweetheart. Teacher is happy. The afternoon lessons passed in a blur. Elena's mind kept wandering to Jacob's words, to the possibility of a life beyond just teaching. She'd spent so long convinced she'd end up alone, a spinster teacher moving from town to town, that the idea of belonging somewhere, belonging to someone, felt almost impossible to grasp. That evening, back at the Bennett Ranch, Elena found Mrs. Catherine Bennett in the parlor, working on needlepoint. The older woman looked up as Elena entered. My son spoke with you today. It wasn't a question. Elena nodded, unsure how much Jacob had shared with his mother. He told me he intends to court you properly, with the goal of marriage. Mrs. Bennett set down her needlework. I assume he explained his feelings? Yes, ma'am. And what are your feelings, Miss Harper? Do you love my son, or are you simply grateful to him for supporting you through your recovery? Elena could have given the safe answer, the one that avoided commitment and kept her options open. Instead, she found herself telling the truth. I love him, but I'm afraid I'm not what he needs. I'm afraid I'll disappoint him, that I'm not grand enough, or polished enough, or whole enough to be the wife a man like Jacob Bennett deserves. Mrs. Bennett's expression softened in a way Elena had never seen. Do you know what Margaret was like before she became Mrs. Jacob Bennett? No, ma'am. She was a farmer's daughter from a poor family. She couldn't read music. She didn't know which fork to use at formal dinners. She'd never been to a social event more elaborate than a barn dance. By all the standards of society, she was entirely unsuitable for my son. Mrs. Bennett picked up her needlework again, her fingers moving with practiced efficiency. But she loved him, and she made him happy. That was all that mattered. I thought you objected to me. I did. Not because I thought you were unsuitable, but because I was terrified of watching Jacob grieve again. Terrified that if he loved you and lost you,
Whether to the town's gossip or to circumstances beyond our control, it would break him completely. She met Elena's eyes. But I've watched you these past months, Miss Harper. I've seen your strength, your determination, your absolute refusal to give up even when you had every reason to. You won't break easily, and neither will Jacob, not with you beside him.
So you approve?
I approve of anything that makes my son smile the way he has since you entered our lives. I approve of anyone who loves my granddaughter with the fierceness you've shown. Whether you're polished enough for society dinners is utterly irrelevant. Elena felt tears threatening again. She seemed to cry so much more easily since the fire, as if the flames had burned away whatever walls had kept her emotions locked inside. Thank you, Mrs. Bennet. Catherine, if you're going to join this family, we might as well start with first names. Over the following weeks, Elena settled into a routine that felt both natural and surreal. She taught during the day, pouring herself into lessons that adapted to her limitations while building on her strengths. The children thrived under her instruction, and slowly word spread through the county about the remarkable teacher at Red Willow Creek who taught both hearing and deaf children together. Families began arriving from other towns, wanting to enroll their deaf children in Elena's school. The school board, now firmly under Mrs. Yates's progressive leadership, approved an expansion. By November, Elena had 15 students, including 3 deaf children besides Lily. In the evenings, she returned to the Bennett ranch where Jacob was always waiting. They'd sit in the parlor after Lily went to bed, talking for hours about everything and nothing. Jacob continued learning sign language, and Elena continued finding her voice, the two of them meeting somewhere in the middle. And gradually, so gradually, that Elena almost didn't notice it happening, the town's perception shifted again. People stopped seeing the scandal of an unmarried teacher living at the Bennett ranch and started seeing the logic of a family forming. The gossips found new targets, and the supporters grew more vocal. In December, Elena's hands had healed enough that she could sign again, not as fluently as before, and never without some pain, but enough to communicate complex ideas. The first time she signed a full sentence to Lily, the child cried with joy. "Thought I lost you," Lily signed back. "Thought fire took teacher away." "Fire changed me," Elena signed slowly, each movement deliberate. "But it didn't take me away. I'm still here." Christmas brought unexpected gifts. The townspeople, led by Mrs. Yates and the other supportive families, raised money for a proper sign language library for the school. Books arrived from as far away as Boston and New York, more resources than Elena had ever dreamed of having. And on Christmas morning, Jacob gave Elena a gift that made her hands shake. A delicate silver bracelet engraved with words in the manual alphabet, spelling out "Don't give up." "So you never forget," he said quietly, fastening it around her scarred wrist. "The words you signed to Lily in the fire. The words she's been signing back to you ever since. The words that define who you are." Elena traced the engraved letters, feeling the weight of their meaning. She'd come to Red Willow Creek expecting to be invisible, to teach quietly, and leave no mark. Instead, she'd been burned and broken and rebuilt into someone she barely recognized, someone stronger, braver, more visible than she'd ever thought possible. "Thank you," she whispered, then added more loudly, "Thank you, Jacob, for everything." He smiled and signed back, "Thank you for seeing me." The spring festival arrived in April with all the pageantry a small Montana town could muster. Booths lined the main street selling preserves and handicrafts. Children ran through the crowds with sticky hands and loud laughter, and a dance platform had been erected in the town square. Elena stood at the edge of the festival, watching the festivities with a mixture of anxiety and anticipation. She wore a new dress, pale yellow cotton, that Catherine had insisted on commissioning, with sleeves that fell just below her elbows, leaving her scarred hands and forearms visible. Her hair was loose around her shoulders instead of pulled back in its usual severe bun. She looked, Elena thought with some surprise, almost pretty, or at least no longer trying to disappear. "Teacher!" Lily came running, signing frantically. "Come see! Papa has surprise!" Elena let the child pull her through the crowd, past booths and well-wishers who called out greetings. The entire town seemed to be present, and Elena felt their eyes on her, some curious, some approving, some still skeptical. But she kept her head high, kept walking. Lily led her to the center of the square where a platform had been raised. Jacob stood on it, and when he saw Elena approaching, his face broke into a smile that made her heart skip. "Ladies and gentlemen," he called out, his voice carrying across the square. The crowd quieted, sensing something significant about to happen. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate spring and community with us today. Before the dancing begins, I have something important to say." Elena's breath caught. This was it. Whatever Jacob had planned, whatever surprise Lily had mentioned, she wanted to run, wanted to hide, but Lily's small hand held hers firmly. 9 months ago, a young teacher arrived in Red Willow Creek. She was quiet and shy, and many of us didn't think she'd last a month. We underestimated her. Jacob's eyes found Elena's in the crowd. "Miss Harper taught us that silence can speak, that differences can unite us, that courage doesn't always come with a loud voice. She saved my daughter's life, twice. Once by teaching her to communicate, and once by shielding her from fire." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. People were nodding, remembering. In the process, she changed all of us. She taught our children compassion and adaptability. She showed us that community means including everyone, not just those who fit our expectations. And she taught me, his voice caught slightly, she taught me that it's possible to love again, if you're brave enough to risk it. Elena's heart was hammering so hard she thought everyone must hear it. Jacob stepped down from the platform and walked through the partying crowd until he stood directly in front of her. "Elena Harper," he said, then switched to sign language, his hands moving with increasing confidence. "You are the bravest person I know. You face fear and pain every day, and you still choose to show up, to teach, to love. You've given my daughter a voice and me a reason to hope. You've made our house a home." He knelt on one knee, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. The crowd gasped collectively. Lily bounced beside Elena, barely containing her excitement. "I'm not asking you to be Margaret. I'm not asking you to be anything other than exactly who you are. Scarred hands, quiet voice, stubborn heart and all." Jacob opened the box to reveal a simple gold ring with a small diamond. "I'm asking you to be my wife, to be Lily's mother, to build a life with us. Not because it's practical or expected, but because I love you, because we belong together." The entire square had gone silent. Elena was aware of hundreds of eyes watching, waiting for her answer. The old Elena would have been paralyzed by such public scrutiny, but the new Elena, the one who'd walked through fire and emerged changed, looked only at Jacob's face, at the hope and vulnerability there. She thought about all the reasons to say no. She was young and scarred and still learning to navigate the world without hiding. She was a teacher, not a society wife. She would never be the polished, perfect woman people expected Jacob Bennett to marry. But she loved him. She loved Lily. And she was tired of letting fear make her decisions. Elena pulled her hands free from Lily's grip and signed, her scarred fingers moving carefully through the air. "Yes, I choose you. I choose us." The crowd erupted in cheers before she'd even finished signing. Jacob stood and swept her into his arms, kissing her in front of everyone, making his choice as public and clear as hers. When they finally broke apart, Elena saw tears streaming down Catherine's face. Happy tears for once. Lily launched herself at both of them, wrapping her small arms around their legs. Elena knelt and gathered the child close, signing with one hand while the other wore Jacob's ring. "We're a family now. All three of us." "Forever?" Lily signed back. "Forever," Elena promised. The festival continued around them, music playing, children laughing, neighbors celebrating. But in that moment, Elena was aware only of the two people in her arms, of the family she'd found in the most unexpected way. "Mrs." Thornton watched from the edge of the crowd, her expression unreadable. After a moment, she approached, her steps reluctant but determined. "Miss Harper," she said stiffly, "I owe you an apology. I was wrong about your character and your intentions. You've proven yourself to be an excellent teacher and an asset to our community." Elena could have held the grudge, could have thrown the woman's cruelty back in her face. Instead, she extended her scarred hand. "Thank you, Mrs. Thornton. I appreciate you saying so." They shook hands briefly, and Elena felt the last piece of her old life fall away.
She wasn't the invisible girl anymore. She wasn't the scandal or the martyr or the damaged teacher. She was simply Elena, beloved and belonging, scarred but whole. The wedding took place 6 weeks later in the new schoolhouse, the building filled with flowers and students and townspeople who'd come to witness the union. Elena wore a cream-colored dress with long sleeves that covered her scars, but at the last moment she pushed them up to her elbows. Let people see. Let them know what she'd survived. Sarah Yates served as maid of honor, standing proud beside her teacher. Tommy Fletcher, transformed from troublemaker to Elena's fierce defender, helped seat guests with unusual solemnity. The other children lined the aisle, each one signing love as Elena passed, a gesture she'd taught them weeks ago. And Lily stood beside her father at the front, her golden curls crowned with flowers, her hands moving through a speech she'd prepared. Thank you for loving Papa. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for being my teacher, and now my mama. I will be the best daughter. Elena signed back through her tears. You already are. The ceremony was brief and beautiful. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Jacob signed, I love you, before he kissed her, and Elena signed it back. The schoolhouse erupted in applause, the sound mixing with the late spring wind outside. At the reception that followed, held on the Bennett Ranch under a Montana sky so blue it hurt to look at, Elena found herself surrounded by people who'd once doubted her, who now celebrated her. Mrs. Yates gave a toast about courage and change. Catherine welcomed Elena officially into the family with a speech that had even Jacob wiping his eyes. And Sheriff Dawson admitted he'd never seen a more deserving couple. As the sun began to set, painting the prairie gold and amber, Elena stood with Jacob and Lily, watching their guests dance and laugh. 3 lives that had been separate, broken in different ways, now woven together into something stronger than any of them alone. No regrets? Jacob asked quietly. Elena looked at her scarred hands wearing his ring, at Lily leaning against her side, at the prairie stretching endlessly before them. She thought about the quiet girl who'd arrived in Red Willow Creek 9 months ago, expecting to disappear into another anonymous teaching position. That girl was gone, burned away in fire and rebuilt through pain into someone who could stand in full view without flinching. No regrets, she said, her voice steady and sure. This is exactly where I'm supposed to be. Lily signed sleepily. Home? Elena gathered the child close and signed back. Yes, sweetheart, we're home. And it was true. Not the house, or the town, or even the people, though all of those mattered. Home was this moment, this family, this choice they'd all made to belong to each other despite every reason to remain separate. Home was being seen and loved for exactly who she was, scars and silence and all. The prairie wind whispered through the grass, carrying the sound of music and laughter across the endless land. And in the middle of it all, 3 hearts beat as one. A shy teacher who'd found her voice, a grieving father who'd found hope, and a little girl who'd found the words to finally tell the world what she was thinking. They'd been broken separately, but together they were whole. The story of Elena Harper, the quiet teacher who walked through fire, became legend in Red Willow Creek. Years later, people would still talk about the woman who taught an entire town to see with their hands and listen with their hearts. They'd speak of the love that grew from ashes, of the family formed not by blood but by choice, of the 3 lives that proved silence could speak louder than words. But for Elena, Jacob, and Lily, the story was never about becoming legend. It was simply about finding each other in a vast and lonely prairie, about building something beautiful from broken pieces, about choosing love even when fear whispered it was safer to remain alone. On quiet evenings when Lily was grown and teaching sign language to her own children, she would tell them about the fire, about the teacher who saved her, about the moment her family truly began, and she would sign the words that had become their family motto, the words that had carried them through every challenge, don't give up. Because in the end, that was the greatest gift Elena had given them. Not just the ability to communicate, but the courage to keep trying, keep loving, keep hoping, even when the world seemed determined to break them. 3 lives, 1 family, chosen not by circumstance, but by love. And that, in the end, was more than enough.